Good evening. Welcome to the Adventurers Club of Los Angeles. We're here tonight with Colonel Hank Reed, United States Air Force retired.
That's right.
And you're here to talk to us tonight about being a pilot and being a test pilot. So we got some interesting stuff here tonight. You brought us this F-35 display. We appreciate that. Thank you for donating that to the club.
It's exciting.
Yeah. So just so our viewers know, this month we're doing like an aviation test flight theme.
Okay.
Right. So all our guests, starting with you, are going to be aviators.
I'm the first one.
Yeah. So yeah. So lots of when we talk about adventure, we kind of think of it in four separate realms, right?
Right.
There's like undersea. There's on top of the sea. There's like mountaineering and trekking and hiking and all that stuff and travel. And then there's air and space.
Right on.
So, we've had a lot of different people on the show, but, we haven't had a lot of pilots. And this club has a lot of pilots in it. So
I'm going to check my math, I hope.
Yeah. So you grew up as like an Army brat, right? Your father was in the Army and took you all over the world, right?
He did.
And then how did you get involved with the military? When did you first think that you were going to become a pilot?
Well, like you said, I was born in the military.
Mm-hmm.
Probably about 7 or 8 years old. I think I went to an air show, saw the Thunderbirds, thought that was really cool. Used to build model airplanes. Vietnam War was going on, so you're sort of watching it out of the corner of your eye. And I thought, that someday I'd like to do that. I'd like to fly jets. That looks cool.
Yeah.
And then as I went through high school, and I realized, I could go to college and go into the military, and do that path. So and then as you pointed out, moving all over, I was born in Germany.
Uh-huh.
My mom's German. She's a naturalized U.S. citizen. We moved mostly over the southeast, but then back to Europe. And I went to high school in Belgium. So I had some real opportunity there to see, besides a lot of travel in the country, but to really appreciate, the Europeans still remembered World War II, and then the Cold War was at the height of it. I played football at Hahn Air Base, and we had to stop the game a couple of times because 4 ships of F-4s were taking off, doing some sort of alert. And so I was around it, and realized that that's what I wanted to do when I got older.
So where did you go to college?
I went to the Citadel, the
Charleston,
military.
right?
Yep, Charleston, South Carolina, military college, 3rd generation.
Wow.
So my granddad went there, class of 33. My dad was class of 60. And we all have the same name. I'm the 3rd.
Yeah.
So, and we're all engineers. Dad and Dad was an electrical engineer. I wasn't that smart, so I was a civil engineer.
What's the most Providence that you've ever heard of at the Citadel in terms of like generations going through
4
there?
generations, I think.
4.
I don't think I've heard of more than 4. But
And you were 3.
Yeah, there's a handful of 4s. So
Is your son going to go?
Okay, so yeah, I knew you were going to ask that. He might be watching. I have 3 sons, and 2 of them did not go. One's at SC right now. One graduated from Seattle U. My youngest is in high school, and I don't know if he goes or not. The Citadel, like all military colleges, is not a place you go lightly because somebody tells you should go. Mm-hmm. You really need to be motivated to go there.
Yeah.
It's an adventure to go there. There's.
Yeah, it can't just be like, oh, my dad wants me to go.
Right.
So,
I mean, people do that, but they don't last, right? You kind of have to have a little bit of steel to go put yourself through some of that.
I know that's a question we actually asked for the Naval Academy. It's a question that you're supposed to ask. Are their parents pushing them to do this, or are they self-motivated? So we actually say, so what do your parents think about this? And they're like, oh, well, they want me to go, but I don't know if I want to. It's like, okay, you're out.
Right.
Immediately.
Yeah.
But Citadel is great. I was just on the phone with a friend before that guy I was on the phone with when you came in was a Citadel grad.
No kidding.
And I met him when we were in Charleston.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, small world.
Yeah, it is a small world.
Yeah. So after the Citadel, you commissioned into the Air Force.
I went to the Citadel on an ROTC scholarship.
Okay.
I was supposed to be an engineer. I was studying civil engineering. And, but I said, I want to be a fighter pilot. Can I do that? Well, maybe, but we don't need to pay you to be a fighter pilot because a lot of people want to do that. So they were kind of threatening to take my scholarship away. So I had to do a little finagling and show them that I had what it took or whatever. And then,
the right stuff.
So basically, I changed my career path while I was in college to go to pilot training. And then I went to a place called Shepherd Air Force Base, which is in North Texas. But it was kind of a special pilot training location. The pilot training there was called Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training. It was specifically set up for the NATO countries to send their pilots to. So there were a lot of U.S. people there, and it was essentially a U.S. joint organization. And so going there was great because it was selective to get there. And then the syllabus was longer, and you had actually more flights there than we had in regular pilot training at the time. And then assuming you passed the course, you essentially were guaranteed to go on a fighter pilot track.
Oh, wow.
So that was like, okay, great. I can go to Euro-NATO. Having known a bunch of NATO people, living in Europe, I was excited to be there. So I was in a class with mostly Dutch, and there was one German guy, and went through that. I was fairly average for that class. It's just kind of muddled.
But
through.
if you passed, you guaranteed
passed,
a
theoretically
fighter spot.
guaranteed to be. What they do is they track you. They determine if you're qualified to fly. They call it FAR, Fighter Attack Reconnaissance. So if you pass through that course, you got FAR'd essentially.
Okay.
Through a normal pilot training, there was another selection process, but it was the numbers were lower. The chances of you getting FAR'd were lower if you went to another pilot training base. So
It was 100% at this base.
it wasn't 100%. There was a
But
guy.
pretty close.
It was pretty high. I mean, there were a handful of folks that were there while I was there that graduated, but they didn't get FAR'd, and so they went off to fly.
So if you don't get FAR'd, what do you end up flying?
You end up flying a transport, which is great.
Like
it's
a
fine. Flying's fine.
C5 or a...
Right. I remember one guy in the class right ahead of me got a C-141. We don't even fly those anymore. It's like a C-17. It's a transport.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so I was
C-17s are nice transports.
They're
though.
very nice transports. They are. They're very cool. You put in a dream sheet, and I put F-16 at the top of my dream sheet. I think I put an F-4 next, and then I think third or fourth was an OV-10, because I thought to myself, if I don't get an F-16, I'd like to get to an F-16 and get an opportunity. If I go to become a forward air controller in an OV-10, they had this path called a first assignment forward air controller. I can talk about what a forward air controller is in a second, but the bottom line is that generally after one tour in the OV-10, you would end up in an F-16 or an F-15.
Do we have a picture of an OV-10?
Oh,
Andy?
you know what? We have pictures. We do. I forgot about
So
the pictures.
this is a picture of an OV-10.
That's a picture
right?
of an OV-10. Yeah.
Pop
That's an OV-10, and that looked about like the OV-10s that I used to fly.
So is there two props on this?
There are two turbo props on it, and
Left and right wings, right? And then the big stabilizer up in the back. What's the deal with that?
It's just the way it's designed. The horizontal stabilizer is high, and just across those two what we call tail booms, and the airplane was designed and built in the mid-'60s predominantly for counterinsurgency, and it saw a lot of action in Vietnam. So what's a forward air controller? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
A forward air controller is generally in a permissive air environment. Permissive means you're not constantly getting shot at by radar-guided missiles.
So you already own the air.
You kind of own the air. I say kind of because there may be small arms. There may be some light anti-aircraft artillery.
Right.
There's always a danger of a handheld, what we call a manned-portable air defense system, right? Like
Right.
a Stinger missile, right? Which is a heat-seeking missile. Somebody just put like a bazooka on their shoulder.
But they
and
don't
shoot.
have any
But they don't have
installments
the
of
big,
anti-aircraft.
Exactly. Because a forward air controller, like the OV-10, he or she is there to control airstrikes and sometimes like I was trained to control battle artillery strikes as well as ship bombardments, right? So
Oh, yeah?
I went through this whole joint firepower control course where I learned how to call in artillery. I learned how to deal with Angelico, the naval liaison, gunfire liaison guy. And if I was with a battalion or in the air supporting our troops on the ground, I could bring in whatever kind of hell that we needed to support them. Fires in the terminal.
So troops on the ground would call directly to you.
Exactly.
And
I
then
would,
you determine or you know,
You would
how
pack
that
up with
happens.
a big stack of maps, right? And you would go out and 1 to 50,000 maps. That's the scale, and the scale is really good because in a 1 to 50, it's kind of like riding in your car with a GPS, at 800 meters or 1/4 of a mile. You can pretty much see every road on the ground. So you got to learn the terrain. You would have 3 or 4 radios on at once. One radio you would be talking to a ground commander. On another radio you would be talking to a controlling agency that's sending fighters to you saying, where are your targets? And you're picking out targets because the guys on the ground are getting shot or getting bombardment from an enemy position. And then you would have to find the enemy position with their help, mark it, and then bring in fighters to drop bombs on that, and do that without, by the way, hitting the friendlies. Right?
And you're flying too.
And you're doing
Is
all
that a
this while you're
single
flying.
seater, or you got?
Yeah, so it's a
co-pilot in there?
2-seat airplane. You see the picture. It's a 2-seat airplane, but generally we flew it single seat. Now you could have, in some cases, you had an observer in the back. The Marines flew OV-10s all the way up into the Gulf War. In fact, they had an OV-10 got shot down in the Gulf War, and a Marine lieutenant colonel and I think a captain were captured as POWs for a week or two. And this was in Gulf War I in 1990.
You have weapons on this?
We did.
A cannon? Does it carry anything on the wings, or just?
Yeah, so you can see the picture again. There's a 2.7-inch rockets, forward-firing rockets or folding-thing rockets, and you can. There are versions of those that have explosives. The versions that we carried had white phosphorus. They were used for marking, basically. You would shoot one at a spot on the ground. You would mark a target if you were accurate. If you were a little bit off, you'd have to say, okay, see my smoke? Okay, go 1 kilometer to the north. That's
1
the target.
kilometer.
Yeah, well, everything's in kilometers typically.
Well, that's a long way.
But yeah, exactly. That's the point.
But you just use the white phosphorus as
We also-
marking,
we
or
had
sometimes you hit some vehicles with it. I mean, or you're not supposed to. It is
Okay.
purely a marking weapon, nothing else.
So
You have to aim at
Yes.
the vehicle behind the people.
yes
type of
and
thing.
no. So the Geneva Conventions, I outlawed the use of white phosphorus directly against people.
Right.
But I'll tell you a little story. That's what we're here for, right? So I went to fly OV-10s in Wheeler Air Force Base, Hawaii. And the great thing about that assignment, besides being on Oahu, right, and living on the North Shore and doing a lot of body surfing,
good
was
assignment.
we closed the squadron down after a year and 4 months. This happens sometimes. We consolidate things, we move
Right.
airplanes around. So we closed the squadron down. So the last few months we were there, we were really in, training was winding down, and we had a lot of munitions that we had to expend, right? So I had an opportunity to go out on one of the ranges, on one of the outlying islands, with those rocket pods you see under there. Each of them carried, I want to say 7 rockets. I think I had 4 rocket pods with these rockets. And on this particular day, they had a number of targets that were out there. They were generally old trucks. Sometimes they're in the center of a concentric circle. They're designed for you to, for a pilot in training to practice gunnery. But on this particular day, I'm out there by myself. I'd done all the training I needed to do. I still had a couple of rockets left, and I saw, a fuel tanker truck. That was a target. It was a legitimate target on this wide open range, and it was sitting there. And I thought, I wonder if I could, hit that truck with a rocket. I had 3 or 4 rockets left. So I come in a normal rocket pass. It was about a 15-degree dive angle, and I shoot one, and just goes right over the top. So I come up, come around, come in a second time, get a little better aim. And mind you, the OV-10 this is a caveman airplane. There's
Yeah.
no round dials, there's no magic computers. You're basically just placing the airplane and using Kentucky windage.
Now, do you have some sort of sight in the cockpit that?
There's a sight, but it's what we call an iron sight, a hard
Right.
sight. So when we talk about F-16s, there's a computerized sight that moves, takes into account the wind and all this other stuff.
But this, you got to line your head up with the whatever.
Exactly. You've got to fly the airplane to the target, and you've got to point the target at the target. So the second time around, I come down this 15-degree dive angle, stand the throttles up, shoot. I'm a little short. the rocket impacts just shy of the truck. All right, I think I have one rocket left. Come off, come around, Okay, this is it. So I roll back in, 15 degrees or so a dive, set the throttles, and this time I push it just a little closer. There are limits to how close you want to get when you're dropping a bomb or shooting a rocket, because there's always a danger that,
How close are you?
Well, I'm not going that fast, 180 or so kilometers or miles an hour, nautical miles an hour, excuse me. And so by the time I shoot this thing, I'm probably a mile, maybe half a mile away, and I shoot it. And I'm going with the rocket. The rocket goes pretty fast though, and it hits the truck, and the truck blows up. I mean, essentially,
like
boom,
more than
like in my face. And I'm like, whoa! So, pull the stick back into my lap. Push the power up, pull off, look down. Wow, that was cool. And so I scared myself.
Why do you think it was such a big explosion?
Just a wee bit. I don't know. I think maybe the truck had been out there not that long, and there was some residual. It was one of these tanker trucks, like you see, that it was a military one.
You think it had like some unexploded ordnance in it?
I don't think it had unexploded ordnance. I think it had fuel fumes in the tank.
And it was just the right mixture.
It was the right mixture, I think. But it was it got my attention. So anyway, so
well, that's a fun aircraft.
The OV-10.
Yeah.
The great thing about learning to fly in the OV-10, I mean, I wish there was a part of me that really wishes I'd have gone to an F-16 first, but the thing about an OV-10 is 180 knots, it was all math, it was clock to map to ground, you learn navigation, you learn how to use the stick and the rudder. I mean, when we taught people to fly F-16s, we said, don't touch the rudder pedals, you don't need to, and something bad will happen. But it was very much...
how do you do like a controlled, or what do you call it, a linked turn?
A coordinated turn.
Coordinated
turn in F-16, it just does it for you. I mean, you put the stick where you want, and you pull back, and the airplane turns. And the F-16, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
But,
We'll talk about the F-16 in a minute.
We can talk about the F-16's flight controls here, because you know a little bit about that. But the bottom line is being in the OV-10 first in Hawaii, and then a couple things it really taught me. Taught me how to fly stick and rudder. Taught me how to navigate without the aid of computers. It taught me how to really feel the air over the wings. I mean, it was real flying.
So you just had a stack of charts, like practically, because like on a sailboat you've got like a nav desk, right?
Right.
And you have all of your charts in there, and you pull out the chart and you set it down on the desk. How do you do that in a cockpit?
So
they all folded up.
Yes.
You get really good at folding them
so you have
back?
a map bag, right? And the map bag would go probably on one side of the glare shield that's over the cockpit instruments, between that and the canopy itself. And we got very good at folding maps, organizing maps, pulling out what you needed. You would take a grease pencil and write on the inside of the canopy. I would never do that on an F-16 canopy, right? F-16 canopy is probably $2 million or something. I don't know what it is. But an OV-10 canopy, it was plexiglass. And if in an air control situation, when you had a whole lot of, you might have 2 or 3 fighter pairs or 2 ships stacked up, right? Waiting for you to call them in on a strike. And so you'd need to keep track of these pilots and these other planes and these other call signs. So you'd write down, Mojo flight, 2 F-16s, 500-pound bombs, Cylon flight, 2 A6s, they would have cluster bombs or whatever, you would write all this stuff on the canopy, and and then you have your maps out, and you generally go big to small. Like for traveling around from the base to wherever the training area was, I would have a 1 to 250,000 map. It was a kind of a big picture map. But when I got into the actual target area, then I would pull out the 1 to 50,000 maps, and then you could get really detailed. And you would measure, this is 3 kilometers or 2 kilometers, and you'd put down a smoke, maybe a second smoke, and that would give you a unit of measure on the ground that everybody could see. You say, okay, see those 2 smokes? That distance between them is 1 kilometer, and they are oriented north-south. Okay, now I have a reference. So now I could tell the F-16 pilot that I'm controlling, using that reference, now I can direct you to where the target is, and more importantly, to where the friendlies are. Right?
How has this all changed? Because you can get pretty accurate. I'm assuming that
Sure.
you get really good and you can put fire down where you need to.
Right.
But how has all this changed now that GPS is so widely available?
Unreal how it's changed. So we'll get to the test pilot discussion here later. But we did when I was here's the irony, right? I learned how to be a forward air controller with all these very rudimentary tools, right? And then years later, when I was an F-16 operational test pilot, we had a whole forward air control training program that I never actually went through because there was this belief that, well, it's very complicated and you need to learn how to use all the stuff. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, the stuff is the technology is complicated, but the basic elements of it, using the technology once you figure it out is easier and more accurate than it was back in the old days, back in the OV-10 days.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's GPS, there's laser marking, there is video. I can, in an F-16 today, I can take real-time video, right, from a targeting pod, and I can beam it to an Army commander on the ground. And he can see what I'm seeing, and he can say, yeah, in that note, building left of that, one building over, one more building over. Okay, the third window to the right, there's where the enemy is. And that's the kind
so
of
cool.
Yeah, it's very cool as far as being very accurate, and frankly being safe for Americans on the ground, that you're not going to hit the wrong one.
Because everybody knows everybody's seen the picture.
On the
they're
same
like
sheet of music.
confirmed that is where it needs to go.
And better yet, the thing about being a forward air controller is there's a lot of talking. You can't do this job without a lot of jabber. Jabber's a problem in war for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're going to jam your radios, right?
Right.
So, and then if they're not jamming your radios, they're listening, right? So what you want to be able to do, what you can do now, is do all this via data link. I can have a complete.
Aren't all our radios encrypted though, or no?
They are. But I mean, in 1986, we had HavQuick. We had a bit of a frequency hopping scheme.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother.
But frequency hopping isn't encrypted.
No.
But it's just harder.
And then you have encrypted, but then sometimes, invariably, okay, this happens in training. It happens in combat.
It's too much of a pain in the ass, so it gets turned off.
People just can't get on. They can't. And
So then you turn it off.
Well, you got you have 4 or 5 people on a team, and 2 of them can get on, or 3 of them can talk to each other, but 2 of them can't. And then what do?
You turn it off.
You turn it off.
Isn't that fascinating? Because isn't that the story for everything technology related?
Totally.
Like everybody, okay, we got to be secure. Security is our priority. But then it gets in the way of what you're trying to do, so people just throw it out the window, and that's how bad stuff happens. I mean, it's like passwords.
Exactly.
People set up. Your organization probably has password requirements where it's like,
and they change
capital,
every 90 days.
uppercase, lowercase, exclamation
10 digits,
point, all this stuff,
right.
And then you have to change it every 15 days.
Yeah.
So then, what do people do? They start writing it
write
on
it
a
down.
sticky note.
They leave it on your computer.
And that's the equivalent, right? With encryption, like, oh, we don't want the enemy listening in.
Right.
Oh, but Sergeant so-and-so can't get on the radio. And then, wait, you guys have been operating without encryption for the last couple of weeks? Like, yeah. It's everywhere.
And even if you do the encryption, though, you can still get jammed.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get jammed by yourself. We famously
The
after
EA6B rolls in and nobody can
the
do it.
EA6B is a great example. The other great example is all the IUDs, the improvised explosive device.
IUD is different than IED.
Sorry, I think IED.
IUD does do some jamming, though.
It does some jamming, but not the kind we're talking about. Improvised explosive devices. We had the Warlock, I think, is what they called it. This happened after I flew in the Gulf War II, Operation Rocky Freedom. But they would have a Warlock on constantly to jam the telephone signals that insurgents were using to blow up IEDs, right? When U.S. or coalition troops were near this IED, they would use a cell phone. So they would have a jamming device that would jam that signal so that the IED could not be blown up. The problem with the jamming device is it jammed the radios too. You would constantly hear this in the radio.
I thought, I don't know. I thought all that stuff was designed to. I thought the because I'm an engineer, right?
Yeah.
Systems, I can make a jammer. I have made a jammer.
Jeez.
It's not hard.
Right.
I thought the whole point behind like the EA6B jamming suite was that it jammed their stuff, but we
not
got
ours.
through it.
Yeah.
But I guess it's not all, it doesn't play as nice as maybe.
Well, being an engineer, that the electromagnetic spectrum is a very interesting place. And
It's
there's a
finite, right?
and it's finite, right? And there's overlap, and yeah, flying with the EA6Bs, that was, you couldn't talk to them when they turn everything on.
Huh.
So and
That's interesting.
We did that a lot too. We can talk about that here.
There is some fascinating stuff. I'm going to nerd out on this a little bit,
Sure.
but there's some fascinating stuff I know that does frequency hopping.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, it can actually detect below the noise floor.
Yeah.
There's some really high-tech stuff that these signals guys can get into. It's basically jam-proof.
Right. Well,
For
I'll
lack
tell
of a
you,
better term.
I'll tell you and the members of the audience here that, all the stuff I'm talking about, this is 20, 30-year-old technology now. Even the leading edge stuff that I flew when I was an operational test pilot, I was on the leading edge of the F-16 this was in 2005 to 2007. Check your watch. It's 2020, and this, there's a bunch of folks that probably have flown more recently than me, and they're yawning, going, yeah, whatever. Dude,
It's still pretty cool because it's the only place it exists,
but
right?
Right.
It's not like,
we've moved beyond it.
if you're basically talking about an iPod.
Right. Right.
But
Yeah.
nobody's making iPod. Like there's
Exactly.
there's no competition
I
in the
still
space.
have a couple in my drawer back home. So.
Okay, so where we
So we were talking about OV10s. We
yeah,
kind of
you're
got
up.
off track, and the OV10 is great assignment. And
I did have a question for you about that.
Please,
so what's
go.
the difference between a forward air controller and OV10 and I guess it would be a combat forward air controller, which is like the Air Force Special Forces guys?
Okay, so
Because there's PJs and
there's
there's
combat controllers.
combat controllers.
Yeah.
Are they doing the same thing, but
Yeah, so I had
on the ground?
So I had sort of I led a double life, so to speak, when I flew OV10s, because I'll get to the point to answer your question in just a moment. As an OV10 forward air controller, I had a mission to fly the OV10 and control airstrikes from the cockpit. But I also, frankly, dirty little secret, that wasn't my combat mission. If we were to go to war, if the balloon went up, so to speak, my other primary duty, which would become my primary duty, would be to go with an Army unit as an air liaison officer and be with them wherever they were, on the front lines, in reserve, wherever, and work closely with their commander and their S3, their operations officer, to be the Air Force that they need. So I was assigned to a cavalry unit at Fort Riley, Kansas, and I used to go out and train with them. And I really developed great bonds with those guys because they're just a lot of fun. The CAV is a whole nother, we could talk an hour just on the CAV, the air CAV and the armored CAV. But the bottom line is, my real job would have been, had the balloon go up, for me to be with them, to call in airstrikes from the ground, to look right at the Army commander in the eye and say, where do you need support? Where do you need fire support? And make that happen for them. Now, to answer your question, there are a number of Air Force, airmen that work in ground combat roles. And combat controllers, their job is essentially to go in and set up expedient airfields that then can be used for dropping supplies, in places where there wasn't an airfield before. So they control essentially the delivery of supplies and or troops in faraway places. But they have to be completely self-sufficient in order to get into those places. They don't get in walking, but generally they are special operators. They go in with special operators.
So their job is when the plane, so they can get the plane on the ground.
They can get the plane on, well, they go in, they scout out the place, they set up runways. They basically put lights
So when the
on
pilots
ground.
and the crew get out, they don't get ambushed or lit
That too.
up by some guys that they don't know that are there.
Exactly. And then you ask about PJs, so pararescue men, PJs. Their predominant job is in the rescue business. They're snake eaters, man. They're the ones that you'll have a helicopter. If I were to have gotten shot down in combat, the helicopter ideally would come in and find me, and a PJ would be the one that would pull me out of the desert or the jungle or wherever I was. They hit the ground, and very small groups obviously just a couple of PJs on a helicopter, and I think they're on HC-130s and some other special ops airplanes, but they're the ones that essentially do that rescue. And I didn't go through PJ school. I understand. And we could argue, you get a bunch of special operators, they'll argue about which school is the hardest, but I've heard PJ school is the hardest.
Well, I think Bud's is the hardest.
Okay.
Sure. But you know what we missed in our chronology here?
Yeah. We're all over the map.
You went
but
to SEER.
Yeah.
What's it SEER stand for? Is it
Survival, Evasion, Rescue,
and Escape.
And Escape. Yeah.
SEER school.
SEER school. I did.
Which is pretty legit.
It's
in
legit.
the 80s, right?
I did. It was 1986. So after I graduated from pilot training at Shepherd, before I went to OV-10 training, I went. You go through this pipeline.
And before SEER got easy.
Hey, there's a picture. Let's talk pictures. There's pictures. There's a picture of like yeah, that one. The one that you got up. That's good, see? So you can see there's a T-38.
So bottom left here.
You see the bottom left, you see a guy. He's in Evasion and Escape and school. And then to the right of that, I don't know if you can see it, the picture maybe, but there's a water survival. So you go through land survival, SEER, and water survival. And the land survival and SEER were at Fairchild, or outside of Fairchild Air Force Base, which is near Spokane, Washington. And I went in the summertime, so it was kind of
like water survival is just like float, and anybody who can pick you up, make sure that they pick you up. You're not picky.
Essentially it is. You learn, essentially it's a pretty easy course. It's a pretty fun course. It was down at Homestead Air Force Base, Florida for a while. Mm-hmm. The hardest part of that course was sitting in a raft literally all day long by yourself in the Biscayne Bay. And you got a cornflake bar, and you had to attempt to try to catch a fish or something. I mean, you're just sitting in this raft and salt water.
Did you catch a fish?
No. I don't think anybody catches.
When you're in the land part, the SEER part, did you catch any food?
So there was two parts to land survival. The first part was the survival part, and then there was the second part, which we won't talk about, but it was essentially the what happens if you get captured part.
So this is where they make you run.
They make you run.
They eventually catch you because they always win.
They do.
And they beat the shit out of you.
Yeah. they send a bunch of people after you. They start out nice. You go as a group, and in the group, you learn really okay, here I am, I'm on the ground, but it's unrealistic in the sense that you have a SEER instructor who's a young airman. He's probably like 22 years old, but he's a real survival expert, right? And he, in this case it was a he, you're in this group of 7 or 8 aviators or prospective aviators, and they go, okay, you got your parachute material, you got your logs, you got your fire starter, I'm going to teach you how to do all the stuff you need to do, how to build a shelter, how to hunker down, how to camouflage yourself. First things you do if you ever have to jump out of an airplane, there's an ejection seat here, by the way. If
yeah.
You notice. And behind enemy lines. So how to hunker down, how to hide, and then after we learn those basic skills, and that involves, you get a bunny rabbit, you kill it, you eat it, you eat the eyeballs. You try to go find and forage for other food.
Why do you eat the eyeballs?
Well, because they're very nutritious.
It's gross? Oh, are they? Yeah, but you got the rest of the rabbit too, right?
They tell you that they're really nutritious. You eat the rest of the rabbit too. There's something about the salt in the eyeballs that you need that salt, evidently. That's what they told me.
They're just messing with you.
I think
you got a whole rabbit.
I mean, there's only 2 eyeballs and there's 8 guys out there. But you learn how to build a fire out of nothing and all that. And then you learn how to escape and evade, right? So then it gets a little bit harder where they break you up and now you're onesie twosies and just eventually just a single person. And then they've got these guys that they know that every inch. They teach you some basic navigation, which if you don't know it, they teach it to you with a compass and a map. And this is really counting paces. You're going up and down hills,
right.
You're checking elevation, but then you got to do that by yourself, being chased, right? And so now you're painted up like this guy was in the picture, and you're evading, and you're trying to be very, very quiet, and people are walking around you, and eventually they catch you because they know where all the good places to hide are.
Does anybody ever?
I don't know.
Is there like a prize if you last a certain amount of time?
I think there was. This is a long time ago.
There's a legend of a man who did not get captured.
There's a legend of a man who did not get captured. Who, but it was fun. That part was fun.
Yeah.
And even playing hide and seek as a grown up, and you're camping in the woods, and you're hunkered down, and you're bivvying.
But I mean, when I play hide and seek, like when your friends catch you, they don't beat the shit out of you.
True.
Because I guess nobody can talk about what happens next, right? But the idea is they train you for like if the enemy captures you to resist
try
torture,
to simulate.
right?
They try to simulate how things could be if the enemy captures you. That's about as far as I can.
It's all
It's all anybody ever says.
That's all anybody ever says about that part, right?
That's all they. But I will tell you this.
But you did it in the 80s, so I'm assuming that it was worse than it is in 2020.
Well, I didn't
don't
go
know.
in 2020.
Maybe
Right?
maybe
So,
in 2020 they're just as hard as they always were. But
I would hope so.
yeah,
It's a good, like many experiences which test people, it's one
Yeah.
of those experiences that test you, that make you introspective and kind of go, I didn't
they
know.
teach you how to escape though.
They give you some thoughts about how you could escape. I don't know that anybody ever has.
There was a legend of one guy.
There's a legend of one
who
guy.
completed all SERE.
Yeah.
You know, he actually escaped.
Yeah. There's, yeah. It was stressful, stressing
Right.
experience.
I bet.
That's how they do it. And you can imagine what that is. You can read about stressful experiences. It generally involves not much sleep for a long period of time. We'll
Right.
start with that.
I mean, that's the
You know?
easiest way.
Yeah, that's
you
the
know.
easiest way. And then there's a variety of other things they get you to do. So
Yeah.
the bottom line of that whole thing was, the coolest part when you're done with all that, it's like 3 weeks long. The whole thing. I'm talking going out, the initial woods part, the escape and evasion, the other thing. Then you get back to the barracks. You might have lost a couple pounds, but you're talking to your buddies about wow, and
Yeah.
then everybody's grabbing pizza and you get a case of beer.
This is so much better than Rabbit Eyes.
This is so much better than Rabbit Eyes. So I have my fondest memories of being at SEER school was the end of SEER school. So, yay, it's
Yeah,
over.
we're done.
I've done that. Check, done.
Did that pizza and beer out.
Yeah.
All right, so we kind of digressed, and then
We digressed.
So after the Bronco, how did you get into the Fighting Falcon?
So I thought I was going to go. So I went from Hawaii, my first assignment, for about a year and 8 months to Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, about another year and 8 months. The flying was similar. It was different but similar. It was a great assignment too. Got married along the way. And it was about after about 2.5 years. The system says, okay, it's time for you to go do something else.
System. I love the system.
I actually worked in the system later.
The
in my
computer has
career.
told me you worked as a detailer, or what
Yeah.
does the Air Force call
The
them,
Navy
detailers?
calls them detailers. I was an assignments officer.
Okay.
At one point, I was the
You were
chief
part of the system.
I was the system.
You were a cog in the system.
Oh, dude, I was the coggest cog. I mean, So I digress, but I'll just say, since you asked, it's not a flying story, but it was a great assignment. I was in San Antonio, Texas, as the chief of fighter assignments in my last year and a half there, in what we call the fighter porch. It was called a porch because it was this old World War II building, and there used to be porches all the way around it.
Mm-hmm.
They enclosed the porches, so this was an office, but it was like a porch. It was a long, skinny office. And I knew approximately every F-16 pilot in the Air Force. I knew their names. I knew who they were. But for a time, they all called me for their assignment. And for the rest of my career, I knew these guys, and they knew me. They're like, "Oh, it's that guy." And a lot of them had,
They all like you?
I'd say some of them like me, and then there were some that
See,
were
I have
like,
a theory.
"That son of a."
Maybe you can confirm this, but I have a theory
right.
that if you are a detailer, or what do you call it, an assignments officer?
Assignments officer.
So
yeah.
assignments
But
officer.
It doesn't sound as sexy as detailer.
Yeah, but basically, the jail calls you up. It's like, hey, so am I going to get the assignment that I want? And you can either say one or two things. It's like, yep, I hooked you up, man. I got
Right.
you. I got what you wanted. Or you can be like, you know what? It's just the system, man. I don't know what to say. Like blah 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 blah, quality spread, blah 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 blah.
System.
But it's the system, and at the end of the day, you put them wherever you put them. But you either get to be the hero or you get to pawn it off on the system.
Yeah.
Is that really what it is? There's going to be some
The
guys.
short answer is yes and no. The longer answer is there are going to be people that end up getting bad assignments, perceived as bad. What I try to do is own up to, hey, here's why you need to go do this. It was a conversation. I didn't usually try to pawn it off on a system. And I think, when you talk about your batting average in an assignment like that, I think I had a pretty good batting average because I was an honest broker with folks, or I tried to be.
I mean, is a batting average like the number of people
Yeah.
that you get number one choice?
I would say no. I sort of use that as an analogy for how many people were happy with their assignment, or how many people were just pissed.
Yeah.
But generally, they might have been pissed, but they weren't really pissed at me so much as I just explained to them. Let me just explain to you. You've never done these things that are considered bad or hard, in your career. You've led a charmed life, and the way the system works is we share the pain. It's your time for the pain. I mean, and that was the gist of the story.
You've had a pretty good run of things.
I had a
You've
great
had
run.
some good assignments and
I had
blah,
an
blah, blah,
amazingly
blah.
blessed
So it's time for you to take an assignment in North
Oh yeah,
Dakota.
yeah, exactly. So
That's interesting.
So I went to F-16s. The timing of that was interesting because I left.
Did you get to assign yourself to F-16s, or was serving as the
I
assignment
assigned
officer?
myself as an assignments officer, kind of, to Spangdahlem Air Base, Germany, which worked out well for me. But I did. But I also had a request. I had a request from leadership there for me to go there.
Is assignments officer one of those things where you get to write your ticket after it?
Kind of.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a reward for the hard assignment that it is,
Right.
theoretically. So
No, there's assignments in the Navy. Like I remember if you did a what was it called, an IA assignment, individual augmentee,
Yeah.
which is basically they needed a warm lieutenant somewhere
right,
in Afghanistan or Iraq,
right.
so to do whatever BS lieutenant job they needed.
Yeah,
You got to do whatever you wanted after that. Like that was the penance, right?
perfect.
So there's always stuff like that. But you got to spread out the bad assignments. I get
And
what you're saying.
I took what was considered a bad assignment. Being an OV-10 FAC was considered a bad assignment.
Really?
There were people in my OV-10 squadron that flew fighters for a couple of years, and then that was a downgrade to them. See, for me, it worked out good because I started out in a slow propeller airplane, and then I upgraded to an F-16. So, from my perspective, things got better.
But it
There's
had-
a hierarchy of what airplane's the best or the coolest, right? We could talk about that.
Is OV-10's not at the bottom, is it?
I think for some people it was considered not the bottom, but
Throw one under the bus. What's the lowest one on the list? Throw
Wow.
it right under the bus.
I will just tell you it's funny how time gives you perspective, all right? So when I was in pilot training, I did not want to fly an F-111. An F-111 is a great airplane.
It's a fighter, right?
It is. But,
Like a long range?
But to me, it was like, it wasn't as maneuverable. It was fast as all get out. I mean, it would go like a scalded ape. And it was, it had great range. I mean, it's a great airplane. By all accounts, it's a great airplane. But at the time, when I was 22, I thought to myself, well, in the hierarchy of fighters, multi-role, air-to-air, air-to-ground, the 111 didn't do air-to-air very well, maybe at all. I knew they were Vietnam era, but so was an F4, but an F4 had sort of a panache about it because it had been
Right.
around since the 50s. Everybody wanted to fly an F4. So I kind of I put a 111 lower on my dream sheet than an OV-10, personally. Some people
Okay,
would have
but these are
considered
all fighters, though, right? But what
Yeah.
about the rest of the Air Force?
So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think for anybody that's out there listening, they're just going to throw eggs, right? But
is it the C5?
my brother-in-law flew C5s and loved it. I'm
don't
just
they
trying
like-
to think.
they never
I
take
didn't want to
off?
fly. I didn't want to fly B-52s. I thought a B-52 was like,
Yeah.
sitting nuke alert. You're sitting in Minot, North
I
Dakota.
mean, if you have to do your job,
right.
bad
Yeah, that's
day.
bad, right?
Bad day. You're probably not coming back,
But
right?
so when I'm in the test community years later, I flew B-52, and it was awesome. And I thought, this is
Yeah.
a great airplane. I mean, it's the longest flying airplane in the Air Force,
But is C5 on the bottom of the list?
I don't
feel
know.
like
I mean,
that thing, the only
again,
exposure I had
yeah.
was taking like Space A flights,
Yeah.
and that thing never took off. C5 flight, and you look, and I'd be like, oh, cool, we're gonna go. No, it's broken. This broke. That broke.
Yeah.
Whatever.
It broke a lot. My brother-in-law could tell some serious C5 broke stories because he flew them for years at Dover Air Force Base.
Yeah, that's where I flew out of, Dover. Never took off on a C5.
But here's the thing: when you're my age, in my mid to late 50s, and I flew once upon a time, there's no such thing as a bad airplane. You know, when you're 20 and you go, yeah, I want to fly the shit hottest, coolest fighter, then you get wrapped around the axle about, I don't want to fly that. That's junk, or this is junk. But
Well, also, it
in
sounds like you
retrospect,
got
you're
to
like,
fly a lot of them,
I did.
which I know, if I had to fly one aircraft, I'd want to fly this one,
Right.
right? But if I get to fly all of them, I have a better perspective. I'm like, oh, no, they're all cool. It's like
Right.
cars, right?
Yeah.
If you have to pick one car, you're not going to pick a Volkswagen Beetle.
Yeah.
But I'd still love to have a Volkswagen Beetle putt around in every once in a while. It'd be
Right.
fun, right? Or a Mazda Miata.
So you have pilots that are here, some military
Yeah.
pilots in the organization. They're probably watching, and they'll tell you that whatever you fly is the best.
Yeah.
When I was an early F-16 pilot, we made fun of F-15s all the time. F-15 is a great airplane. Great airplane. F-15 pilots, we call them ego drivers. It's the Eagle jet, but it's the ego jet.
Yeah.
We made fun of them.
But the
all.
F-16 is arguably, or objectively, I guess, the Air Force's plane. I mean, as much as the F-18 is the Navy's plane,
Yeah.
the
So
F-16, I mean, again,
there's
what
more of
do
them than
the
anything
Falcons
else. Yeah,
fly?
They
Fly the Fighting
Thunderbirds.
Falcon,
Yeah.
right? The Thunderbirds, yeah.
Thunderbirds fly F-16s,
Yeah.
exactly.
And the Blue Angels fly F-18s.
They do.
Right?
They do.
So,
Now someday the F-16, the Thunderbirds will fly F-35s. I think.
are all those demonstration teams going to fly the F-35? Not that it's not a cool plane, but I mean, I don't know.
The Blue Angels are just this season now switching over from the Legacy Hornet, so that the A, B, C, and D are called the Legacy Hornets, to the Super Hornet, which looks like a Hornet but it's a little bigger, the E and F version. They're just this year. This is their first season with the Super, and it'll be interesting to see how the shows, if they change the shows much, because they're bigger, they're more powerful. There's some things they probably do.
Yeah.
In some ways better, maybe some things they do not as well. It's like when they went from F4s to A6s, and the F-35. I'm sorry, the Thunderbirds, same thing. They did F4s and then they did T-38s, and like, well, it's a trainer, but it was smaller, lighter. In some ways, it's just different. It's a different show.
So that is interesting because, I was looking up the F-16. The F-16 is the first fighter that they made that has negative static stability.
Right.
So basically, from what I understand, and correct me because you're the man, but
Today I'm the man.
That means that the plane basically will not fly. Like it's not inherently stable. Like normally, like I throw a paper airplane, the paper airplane goes, right? So the F-16 is negatively stable. So if it's just going, unless it's supersonic,
Yeah.
it will oscillate its attitude, and those oscillations will build
So the
until
F-16 has a fly-by-wire or a digital. Now they're digital flight control system.
So when you say fly-by-wire, that means technically a computer is flying this thing.
It means that the pilot gets a vote, and and the computer gets a vote, and there are 4 flight control channels. They're digital. When you make a stick or a rudder input, it goes to a flight control computer to ensure that takes that input and also looks at the air data sensors, the static and the dynamic air data sensors, to determine if the airplane can do what you're asking it to do, and it imposes limits to a certain extent on what the pilot asks of it. Can you just take a picture? There's a picture of, there's a F-16 where you see the bombs on the bottom. Let's just show that first. Yeah, that one. So that's a F-16 loaded for combat. When you first learn to fly an F-16 at Luke Air Force Base where I was, they don't look like this. They don't have any tanks on them. This one has, if you go, from top to bottom, it's got a radar-guided missile, a heat-seeking missile, another radar-guided missile, a wing tank, an electronic jamming pod, another wing tank, another missile, another missile, another missile. But when you first learn to fly them, you fly them clean, which means they have nothing on them, and they're magnificent in that phase, because they're lightweight and they turn and they're just awesome. But when you have stuff on them, you have limits on the amount of G's you can pull. And when you get slow, you've heard about stalls. Theoretically, the F-16 doesn't stall, but what it will do is it won't allow you to get into a stalled condition, essentially. The computer reduces the angle of attack maximum that you can command with the stick when you're at a certain air.
And that's not true of other aircraft, like the F-15 or the F-18? Or
I can't speak for all versions of the F-18. I think it's not true. I think it's the current F-18s, the Super Hornets do that. But let's go back a generation. Let's say like the F-4, F-86, F-100. All of those, none of those had any.
So you could stall it.
Absolutely. And you can theoretically stall an F-16 too, but it's a completely different stall.
So what's the advantage of having this negative stability on an aircraft?
Well, two big advantages. One, it makes it a lot easier to fly, right? Because the computer is doing a lot of the stuff for you. The other big advantage, what it really means is you've got positive lift on both the wing and the tailplane. In most conventional airplanes, you have positive lift on the wing, right? Think about the wing, and then you have negative lift on the tail, and that gives you a sort of a balance, right? The F-16 basically has positive lift on both. Now, you can't fly like that without a lot of help, constantly making inputs with the control surfaces to ensure that the airplane doesn't get into this oscillation that you read about. So, but having positive lift on both means essentially your effective lift is higher than it would be. You're not fighting against the tail negative lift when you pull back on the stick.
Okay.
And so it's more efficient.
Huh.
Yeah.
And what about power in this plane? How fast can it go?
2.02 Mach max normally.
How fast have you been?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that.
That's the next one.
I want to say 1.46. I was an FC, a functional check flight pilot, and there were a couple times you had to go Mach, and it's hard to get going fast in all versions of the F-16. You had to have a clean jet, nothing on it. And you run out of gas pretty quick when you don't have wing tanks, when you're in full afterburner.
Yeah.
Right? So
when do you go that fast? Why would you go that fast?
For combat reasons, you would do it because you want to, generally it's a survival thing. It's to get to the fight quicker, and it's to impart greater energy on your weapons. The most obvious example is on an air-to-air weapon. If I'm shooting a radar-guided missile, if I'm higher and faster, then my radar-guided missile will have considerably more range. And the trick, when you are in a dogfight, I use that term because most people, laymen, understand that it means an air-to-air engagement. Generally, in 2020 and even in 2007 or 2009, when I stopped flying, you in combat would likely never get into a close-in visual dogfight, and if you did, somebody would not survive that, and maybe both would not survive it, because it's generally unhealthy to get slow and low in a turning fight over.
So you're saying practically there is no
being
inverted,
all that stuff is really cool.
Hitting the brakes and having them fly right by. That does not happen.
It happens in training all the time, and it's an important skill to have and to develop in a fighter pilot. But for practical purposes, the days of a visual merge as a desired outcome of an engagement are long gone. And the reason that is the weapons that you have that you might have and that any prospective enemy might have are so lethal in close that somebody's going to die. And so hopefully it's not you, but could be, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, just the air-to-air heat-seeking missiles are incredible today. Essentially, with a helmet-mounted sight, go to the cockpit picture in green. You'll see a couple of cockpit pictures. So you can see this is a picture of me in the test canopy.
There's no grease pencil on that canopy.
That canopy is clean, man. But the other thing about it is you can see this big old, look at my helmet. It looks like this great big huge cranium, right?
Yeah.
And the reason it is because I've got a helmet mounted sight on top of that. There's essentially an electronics unit, and the glass on this particular, sight visor is expensive. When you bring it down, it projects the symbology that I would see on my heads-up display onto the visor. And the great thing about that is my heads-up display in an F-16 is right in front of me. So if I want to use that symbology to shoot something, I have to turn my airplane and point it at what I'm trying to shoot. With a helmet-mounted display, I can look and I can point my weapons and sensors at something.
And when did we have that technology?
On my wing line. Well, we started flying with HEMEX in the early 2000s. That picture was taken in somewhere between 2005 and 2007. I think it was closer to 2007. And we were getting them in the field. We were testing them, but they were going out to operational units.
It's interesting because, in the civilian world, what we call that today is augmented reality.
It is kind of, but
Right.
remember, you're still seeing the world. All you're seeing is a symbol on top of the world.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly what augmented reality is. Like,
Right.
have you ever put on those Google glasses?
Yeah, no, I haven't, but I think
Yeah, they're pretty awful compared to what you described, right? Because you have the whole visor.
Right.
But even like, Microsoft HoloLens and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
They're trying to push that. It's just interesting that the military had such a advanced augmented reality system.
Yeah.
You call it the HEMEX?
Yeah, helmet-mounted cueing system. Hey, I'm going to try not to have a lot of acronyms in this discussion because it's acronym city.
Oh, you know how to communicate with the civilians. That's important.
I
right?
attempt to try to be able to communicate with civilians.
I do talk to some buddies that are still in the Navy.
Yeah.
And they talk to me like I'm still in the Navy.
Right.
I'm like, dude, like I'm sort of tracking, but like 90% of what you're saying is acronyms. And I'm just trying to get it by context right now. And I don't know, like they've all changed.
Right.
Right.
Right. But the cool thing about going back to the dogfighting thing, if I'm in a dogfight, I can now with an advanced AIM-9 Sidewinder missile. We call them nobody calls them a Sidewinder, but that's what they're called, right? AIM-9X is the most advanced version.
Why doesn't anybody call them a Sidewinder?
It's the funny thing about nicknames in the military. It's like the military establishment gives a nickname to something, and then the people that use it don't use the nickname. A great example is the F-16 Fighting Falcon. I don't know anybody that flew the F-16 that called it the Fighting Falcon.
What do they call it?
Viper, generally. That was
Viper?
Viper.
Viper.
Yeah, the Viper was what disparagingly in the
Like
early,
from Battlestar Galactica Viper?
Yeah, exactly. But I don't think I think it came from before that. I think they were calling F-16s Vipers probably in the in the early 80s. I hear that the F-35 Lightning II, or Thunderbolt, is it Thunderbolt II? Lightning II, excuse me, is called a Panther by operators.
Yeah.
Because it's silent and killer. It's a silent killer, like a panther. The A-10 is the Thunderbolt II. I'm sorry, nobody ever called it that. It's
the A-10,
it's
the Warthog, right?
The Warthog, the Hawk.
Yeah.
But the official Air Force name is. And so when you call, when you're talking about your missiles, generally you call a advanced medium. A lot of people call that an AMRAAM because that's what it's called. It doesn't have really a nickname. But a Sidewinder is generally called a 9X, or a 9 Mike or a 9 Lima for the older versions. So anyway, the 9X Sidewinder missile today, can shoot like this far back from. It's pointed like this. I can shoot it, and it'll go turn a corner.
You're making the symbol for like 180 degrees.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So
basically,
so
you
if
can
I'm
look
sitting in
left
my
or right,
cockpit and I'm
you
looking
can-
left or right, to my wing line or maybe even slightly beyond it, if I'm in a slow dogfight with somebody, I can take my HEMEX. I can look at the MiG. I can designate the MiG with the symbology. So the symbology's on the thing. I hand it on the airplane, my enemy. I hand that symbology off through the computer to the 9X missile. It comes off the rail, and it does a really sharp turn, and it's going to hit that dude. And he's got the same thing. I mean, we called them the AA-11. That's the NATO designation for the, I can't read the R-43. I'm stretching now without my aviation week in front of me. But anyway, the Russians build the same kind of thing. It's just
Right.
a really good all-aspect heat-seeking missile. So bottom line, dogfights, cool in training, not so cool in combat. Probably dead.
Yeah.
Maybe both of you.
But that was the plot at Top Gun. The opening to Top Gun, why they went to Top
Right.
Gun is like the pilots these days have
Right.
become more or too dependent on missiles.
We could argue that you might get into a dogfight not by choice, but because the other issue that happens, we're not going to talk politics, but I'll just say there's rules of engagement. And in certain wartime scenarios, you may have to have a visual identification, positive visual identification of your enemy. Now, what good is a missile that I can shoot 50 miles away if I
If
have
you
to have
gotta-
a positive
yeah.
visual identification. Now, I might have a TV with a really high magnifying camera, and that exists. That's called a targeting pod, and we can talk about those. I don't know if I have a picture. I do have a picture. Go to the two-ship at sunset. No, that's the two-ship under
Refueling?
the tanker. That one. If you look really closely, the kind of the front end, there's this dark-looking appendage hanging
green
down.
tube?
Yeah, that green tube. That's a targeting pod, and they are amazing. I mean, you can take the camera on the front of that targeting pod, and I can zoom in. I can lock on to another airplane 30, 40 miles
Basically
away.
a telescope on
It's
a
a
gimbal.
telescope that then it shows up on a little TV screen in my cockpit. And I can zoom in and go, oh yeah, that's a MiG-29, or oh yeah, that's a Su-30, or whatever.
That
So
counts as visual identification, right?
It can.
Yeah.
It can. I mean, not in all cases, but it can. That plus other things. There's other ways we identify airplanes. But anyway, my point is you may be waiting to get clearance to fire, and you may end up in a visual dogfight merge is when you meet visually, and go, oh yeah, that's a MiG-29, and now I'm clear to shoot him because I've positively identified that as an enemy airplane. Now I'm in this dogfight. Oh, good grief! So now I have to turn and point, and he's trying to do the same thing, and it can get ugly, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, you only have to turn 180 degrees, right? And then you can see him.
theoretically, yeah, you turn 180 degrees, but he's turned 180 degrees. So if you met at high aspect and you both turn 180 degrees, now you're going to meet at high aspect again, but you're going to be lower and slower because you're pulling G's this whole time. So you're bleeding energy. And then there's a question of, do I want to do that turn in afterburner, which gets me around the turn faster, but also makes me much more vulnerable to heat-seeking missile because I got this great big heat source.
How
out of my
fast
tail.
is? Okay, so like
Go back to that picture. Big heat source, right?
Yeah. So as soon as you kill your afterburners, how fast does that heat signature go away?
It goes away pretty fast. And then you add in some flares, right? So you carry flares with you. You pop the flare. It's a really bright heat source. Problem is the missiles are so good nowadays. First of all, they can detect your engine without the afterburner. And second of all, they don't bite off on flares. There's flare rejection logic that exists. I mean, it's just, we just get better.
It's cat and mouse game,
It's
right?
cat and mouse.
You keep
Everything,
going
you
back
get
and
better,
forth.
you get better, they get better, we get better, they get better.
So when you started flying the F-16, you told me a story earlier about you took command of a squadron.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I didn't right away. So go to the
Right.
elephant walk. The airplane's on the ramp. So I started out in a place called Moody Air Force
It's called
Base.
an elephant walk.
Yeah, it's called an elephant walk. A lot of times, this is at so I flew for 3 years in Georgia. I was a captain, and then I went to Korea for a year. This is at Kunsan Air Base, Korea, and that was a very interesting assignment because we always training. Korean War's not over, right? They never
aware.
really settled it, right? Seriously, never really settled it. So at Kunsan Air Base, there were two squadrons. I was in the Pantons, the 35th Fighter Squadron. There was the 80th Fighter Squadron, the Juvats, Headhunters. We were big rivals. But at the end of the day, we exercised a lot. I mean, exercise. And then I did that, and then I went back to Luke and flew as an instructor.
By exercise, what do you mean? Do you mean
I mean
patrolled
played
the
war.
DMZ?
I mean, we played war like it was real. And I'm talking about, we would have 24-hour operations. We would be bunkered down. We would have chemical gear on. We would have helmets, flak vests. When we would go fly, we would fly at the DMZ. We wouldn't obviously cross the DMZ, but we would fly missions doing predominantly close air support in the DMZ, practicing.
But when you were practicing, were you carrying live munitions?
Generally not. There were some live munition sorties we would go, but we wouldn't go to the DMZ to drop the bombs, obviously, because there wasn't a live.
So you weren't doing patrol, masquerading as drills.
No. This was generally these kind of exercises involved flying, but they were also about what we call fighting the base. The base has to be ready to fight. It's kind of like being on a ship, right?
Right.
There's two Air Force bases in Korea, Osan and Kunsan. So you can better believe that if we were to go to war over the DMZ, North Korea, South Korea,
they're targets.
everything is incoming into those
So
two bases.
you've got to get off that base.
So the
pretty fast.
engineers would practice patching runways. We would practice hunkering down during a chemical attack. We would practice dispersing the forces when there was an attack. All this kind of stuff you'd practice constantly. You would have an exercise every month, and then at the end of your year there, typically in the late springtime, there would be an operational readiness inspection, and the leadership of the wing would all turn over after that inspection. That was like their report card, right?
Yeah.
So I did that. So great assignment for its own reasons. You were asking about, so then I did a couple of things, went to school. I was an instructor pilot at Luke Air Force Base, not terribly scary, but when brand new students, first time flying the F-16 are flying and you're in their back seat, that makes for some scary moments.
Yeah.
Right?
What's the scariest moment when you have a student in there?
The scariest,
Takeoff landing or what?
That can be, but the F-16 is pretty easy to take off and land. I could pretty much teach anybody to take off and land an F-16 pretty quickly. The scariest moments for me were teaching dogfighting, especially what we call the high aspect dogfighting. So that's when you start out in dogfight training, you would start out in a perch position. So there would be a clear defender in the front and a clear offensive plane in the back, and the guy or gal in the front would try to defend by turning their airplane. And so sometimes, I think we started out teaching the students defense first. How do you defend yourself if someone rolls in behind you? So you would learn how to jink and to avoid getting shot. Okay, that was that's not hard. I mean, you pulled a lot of G's and you had to look over your shoulder a lot, but beyond that, it wasn't terribly scary. What got scary is you went from defense to offense and then to high aspect. So you would have these dogfights that would be intentionally set up through what we call a neutral pass, a high aspect pass. You would fly within 500 feet of each other at closure, so closing velocity of over 1,000 knots, right?
Right.
One person's going 500, the other's going 500, you're closing at 1,000 knots. In the back of an airplane with a student in front in his first high aspect sortie, and the canopy's a little curved, and you're going, you're making sure as an instructor that he's not going to hit that dude. He's going to get close to him within 500 feet, but you don't want to get...
And how do you ensure you don't hit each other? You're just watching?
Yeah.
Is that Mark 1 eyeball?
You're watching with the Mark 1 eyeball. Generally, there's a radar lock involved. But even that, things happen very, very fast at that speed. So there's some trust involved. Like all instructor pilot activity involves some level of trust. And because if you control everything as the instructor, then the student is not going to learn anything. Students have to scare themselves a little bit to learn lessons.
Right, but not die.
But not die, right.
Well, I told you
That's
the story
trick.
about why how this thing is here.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
This was, from the reports or whatever.
right.
This was a
It was the
rendezvous.
same kind of thing, right?
But it's even easier,
Yeah.
right? Because this was a rendezvous. So
right.
there's no
planning
closing
to get
rate.
together.
Yeah, they're planning to get together.
They're
so
closing
their
at a
closing
real
rate
easy rate,
is
yeah.
whatever rate that they want.
Right.
Like you described,
Right.
1,000 knots.
Right.
This but an instructor and a
Yeah.
student bounced off each other.
Yeah.
Both popped out. Yeah, they both jumped out.
And unfortunately, that happened. That happens. It's not unheard of that happens, because the most dangerous thing, and you do a lot of it in the military, is flying in close formation. You saw that picture, flying in close formation. But
Yeah, which one was that? The one?
so they're both. Show me
the
any
refueling,
that
right?
one.
Yeah, that's close.
So that's close. If the airplane in the back, who's the wingman, pulls too hard on the stick, he's going to hit the airplane in the front. That's all it has. So you spend a lot of time in pilot training learning how to fly formation in a safe manner, which is I'm matching speed, I'm matching aspect, altitude with and those same skills, you use them in dogfighting. But now what you're trying to do is you're trying to match to a position of weapons employment as opposed to just a position of flying.
Now, I'm interested. How does the throttle work on the F-16? Like, if you set it, is it going to maintain an airspeed? Is it basically like a cruise control throttle, or is it maintaining constant thrust?
It maintains constant thrust. It can maintain constant airspeed if you're not doing anything different. If you're flying at the same altitude, the same G loading, the same, and nothing changes, essentially you can set throttles and make very small or no changes to them, and you'll keep that airspeed. And you generally do that by setting a power setting, like a percentage of your RPM is the way I used to do it. But let's talk about being a squadron commander.
Yeah.
Can you go to the overhead picture of the airfield? You asked me about this is Spangdahlem Air Base, Germany. It's in western Germany, and it was very green. And I went there after my fighter assignment tour.
And what year was this?
I went there in 2001.
All right.
And we arrived there July 4th, I think, 2001. And 9/11 happened. Things got kind of crazy. When I first show up at the base, I was the chief of safety of the wing. I flew with the Blue Squadron, the Fighting Hawks, the 23rd Fighter Squadron. And then I became the operations officer for the Fighting Hawks. So I flew pretty much all with the Fighting Hawks. I was in those two jobs back to back for about a year and a half. So December, I was told in the fall of 2002 that I would become a squadron commander. Well, in the fall of 2002, things are starting to get a little heated in Iraq. We had been flying, the United States Air Force never stopped going to war, in the Navy too, over Iraq since the first Gulf War, since 1990, 1991. In fact, I flew Operation Southern Watch sorties in 1991, and then I flew them again in the early 2000s. All that time, we're flying and patrolling the no-fly zones over North and South Iraq, northern and southern Iraq. We weren't generally flying right over Baghdad, but those northern flights.
But during the gap, the Iraqis did reestablish their Air Force, right? Like Saddam did reestablish.
Yeah.
He owned the air over Baghdad.
He owned the air right over Baghdad. But there was, to answer that question, he established the ability to control the air through the acquisition of surface-to-air missile systems. As far as the ability of his Air Force to do much flying, I think it was really limited in that whole period of time, because the northern and southern no-fly zones took up so much of the real estate over the country. And there were a lot of sanctions that prevented him from really establishing an Air Force. So they did, and so there were periods of time that we flew over Northern Watch, Southern Watch throughout the 90s, that there would be a flare-up in the sense of the Iraqis would try to shoot one of our airplanes down with a surface-to-air missile system.
While you're patrolling
While
DMZ.
we're patrolling that no-fly zone.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they...
I do remember that.
They did launch some airplanes early on in the no-fly zone, but they were pretty quickly dispatched, and so they kind of stopped doing that later. So when I went back to fly in that part of the world, a couple of years had passed, I'd done some other assignments. When I got back to Germany, the picture, and then became a squadron commander. Well, I became a squadron commander in December 20th, 2002. About this time, there's all this talk about sanctions, about chemical weapons, about problems with the Iraqis, and I was supposed to deploy with the. By the way, I was flying with the Blue Squadron this whole time. Now I'm the squadron commander of the Red Squadron, the 22nd, the Big 2-2, or the last of the Red Hot Fighter Squadrons, we called ourselves. And there was a pretty intense rivalry on the base between Blue and Red. There were some folks that, when I became the squadron commander, they were kind of like, I don't know this guy, he's from the other squadron, we don't really like the other squadron. So there was a little bit of animosity just in general terms against me being the squadron commander. I knew most of the folks, it was a small base. So we exercised with those guys, but there was a really strong rivalry between the two squadrons. So I came in there on December 20th. If you go to the January, there's a picture that says January 16th, 2003. That picture is of, are you showing it? Because I don't, maybe.
No, that's a map.
Yeah, that perfect. Just show that for a second.
Yeah.
So this is a pic. So that's an overhead view of Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. And you can see the right side of the map, the left side is the overhead view of the runway. The right side of the map is the map of the Gulf right after I took command, so 31 December 2002. And there's now a movement of coalition forces to build up. There was already forces there for Operation Southern Watch, but a buildup is happening right? And we're part of the buildup. So from Germany, 3.5 weeks after I take command of the squadron,
Deploy.
we go deploy. You're taking 12 airplanes, you're taking, some pilots, and you're going to a place we can't tell you where you're going initially. I mean, literally the day of my change of command, we're at a reception, we're having a party, and the wing commander and the ops group commander pull me aside, and they go, we need to talk. And they pull me into an office, and my wife is kind of giving the shrug, like, what's going on? And they're telling me, okay, you're going to deploy in 3 weeks. We thought you were going to deploy in March, but things are moving up because of the situation on the ground, right?
Yep.
So we deploy. So we go to, show that picture of the flag and the sign. So this is literally right after I take command of the 22nd Fighter Squadron. And, the people decorate the sign, and that's me. And
Hey, so they got your name up there.
I got my name up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And then go to the picture of this like encampment, bunch of tents in like nowhere land. Yeah. So we go to Al Udeid Air Base.
So
Qatar.
you just took command of your squadron at that nice base in Germany.
In this nice base in
hanging
Germany.
out with your family. and
Everything's
boom,
cool. Boom.
Tents in
3.5
Qatar.
weeks later, we're here. And not only that, but the reason they're tense is because there's nothing there.
It's just an airfield.
It's a concrete everywhere, but there's nothing happening there. There's like an occasional transport plane. The Qataris are hardly using it. They built this magnificent base with all this hardened aircraft shelter, all this ramp space, 10,000 something foot runway, but they're not using it. So we deploy down there, we land, and we got to build the base from scratch.
They didn't have like barracks or anything? They just had runway and shelters?
Yeah. They didn't have barracks. So we build a tent city. Show us that Quonset hut picture.
Yeah.
This is my squadron. We build a squadron out of this Quonset hut. Basically stand it up out of nothing. The 2-2 on there, it tells you the 2-2 Expeditionary Fighter Squadron now. But we don't turn a wheel. We land there on the 16th. We're not even allowed to fly our first sortie until the 27th. Because for 11 days, there's this diplomatic back and forth about, they allowed us to come there, but they weren't sure that they wanted us to conduct combat operations out of that base. So the Qataris and the U.S. are talking, the coalition, all this stuff. Finally, we allowed...
Before we just decided to do it, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. So then we're allowed to fly, but we're not allowed to fly combat missions. We're allowed to train. So we're training over, Qatar, which is like basically a peninsula, an island.
So what does that mean? You're not allowed to load weapons?
Correct. We're allowed to, so we're flying training sorties. We're getting everybody recurrent after 11 days of not flying. We're learning the landscape.
I feel like that. What that really means, though,
Yeah.
is that we didn't need to be flying yet. Because I feel like if we needed to fly with weapons, we would have just done it. But we didn't quite need to yet, so we were being diplomatic and saying, sure, we're just going to train for a
Oh,
little
I'm
bit.
sure there was.
But I mean, if you needed to go,
Yeah.
probably would have gone. Was that the sense that you got on the ground?
Well, the weird thing is we got bits and pieces, right? We never. I mean, I'm on a secure phone every day talking to the folks back in Germany, working with the command post. The headquarters of the CENTAF, the Central Air Forces, operation was at Prince Sultan Air Base, which is where we thought we were going to go, which was in Saudi Arabia. We ended up going to Qatar because I think they needed to disperse folks because there were going to be lots more forces coming in the country. And they're still trying to, they're building up a plan, a war plan. They're trying to figure out diplomatically if we're going to actually go to war or not. There's a Southern Watch operation happening, but they weren't ready to bring us into that rotation because they had enough airplanes to do that. So we start flying training missions the 27th. I think it was the 15th of February where we actually got to fly our first Southern Watch sortie, so over Iraq, a combat sortie, but it's still patrol, right? But it's, so I led that first sortie like a squadron commander does. Okay, I'm gonna lead from the front, and, so myself and Planet Boyd, another guy, we had a gaggle of a couple different types of airplanes, and we fly this patrol. And the interesting thing about the geography there is, Qatar's about an hour and a half, an hour from direct flight time from the Iraqi border. And if you're going to fly over Iraq, you want to make sure you have a lot of gas. So you take off, you fly into the Gulf, you find a tanker, you refuel, then you go into Iraq, you do your thing for a 2-hour patrol or a 3-hour patrol, and then you come back, you hit the tanker again, don't hit it. That's what we call,
Right,
getting
right.
fuel from the tanker. You hit the tanker again, and then you come home. So the whole thing's like a 4 or 5 hour sortie, which is a fairly lengthy sortie in an F-16. Your training sorties are like an hour and a half, maybe 2 on a good day. So, so we're doing Southern Watch, and Southern Watch gets built up.
And what was your weapons loadout for this?
It was harm.
All harms.
All harm missiles.
And like a sensor.
And the reason it
or
was
the-
is because that was our mission. So go to the single airplane underneath where you see the bottom of the airplane for a second. One more time, that single F-16 picture.
That's a beautiful plane.
Yeah, that's a good one. You can see from this one. I want you to go to the flying one in a second. The single, yeah, that one. So that little pod that you saw in the last picture and that you see kind of on the front, just under the inlet of this one, is called a harm targeting system. And what that does is it allows you to precisely target radar sites that are emitting.
So you're picking which radar site you want with that one.
Correct.
And then passing that information off to the missile.
Exactly.
And then it sticks to that
And then
one.
the missile says, now I have a precision location of the radar site. And then the missile does its thing because the missile has an anti-radiation seeker on it. So it'll look for radiation and it'll home in at the end game. But the harm targeting system gets it very close, right? So we're flying with harms and harm targeting system because our mission is force protection. But it gets more interesting. As from 15 February until mid-March or so, the Southern Watch buildup builds up. If you remember from the first Gulf War, there was Scud missiles that we were worried about. I'm looking at the time.
You're fine.
I've been talking for a long time.
Yeah, it's great.
So your
Yeah,
audience
Scuds
is
were
probably,
the big one in the first one.
Scuds
right?
were a big one, and we were concerned about Scuds in Western Iraq. So our mission, and we had sort of planned and prepared for this, is to be the force protection for surface-to-air missiles in Western Iraq as part of this Scud hunt. Because we had a plan, the coalition had a plan to find and destroy Scud missiles in Western Iraq, much like we did in the first Gulf War, because the same dynamics, political dynamics existed. If the Iraqis launched Scuds into Israel or to any Western country west of that could have upset the balance of the coalition or caused the Israelis to come in and counter. So we wanted really not to happen. So this whole Scud hunt thing relied on a variety of forces. There were forces on the ground. There were special operators that went in using helicopters and slow-flying airplanes, or on the ground looking, and we were sort of the overwatch protection of that because there were a bunch of Rolands, which were mobile surface-to-air missile systems, that we were concerned would be out to potentially shoot down helicopters or slow-moving airplanes. So we were part of that force.
Right.
Being in Western Iraq for your mission from Qatar, the geography it's a long flight, right?
Yeah.
So now it's 2 hours to get there. It's 1 or 2 refuelings. You go into what we call the box, into Iraq. In Western Iraq, we're patrolling, and we're in there for a couple hours. We might go refuel during that time, and we're sort of really watchfully waiting. We're paying attention to the sensors. We're listening to command and control. We're tied into the folks on the ground.
What were your rules of engagement? Like if one of these
So we
these
could defend
Rolands-
ourselves. We could
But if one of the Rolands popped up, like I'm assuming that you can tell from your aircraft whether or not this SAM site is
yes.
hot.
You could tell from your aircraft whether the SAM site was hot.
So if it's hot, you're allowed to shoot it?
So it's hot, you're allowed to shoot it. Yeah,
Okay.
Exactly. Not much happened. But they were harrowing missions, right? Because we're flying long missions, 8-hour missions, and the weather was crappy. I mean, this was now, we're in early March, there's sandstorms.
It's not, no Southern California.
It's no Southern California. And, but we were getting a sense from talking to the command post that the war's going to kick off any day. Well, so now I put myself on this sort of night schedule because I think things generally happen in the early morning hours. So we have folks flying now 24/7. We have a 2-ship or more of F-16s over. Show us the picture of the 2-ship behind the tanker. There's a 2-ship or more over southern Iraq at all times. Now this is me and my wingman, my paired wingman, Corn Peterson. Corn was his call sign. And he's got an airplane on the right with harms. and this is a little bit later in the war. I've got a JDAM. I think I have a JDAM and a Wickman, a CB-103, which is basically a wind-corrected cluster bomb. It's not just your everyday cluster bomb. It's a special cluster bomb that has the ability to sort of correct for winds up and down. So, but Corn and I were flying at night. We would literally wake up at midnight. We would brief to fly. We would grab some food. We would get to our jets about 2 in the morning. We'd take off 2 in the morning, 2:30 in the morning, and we would fly until the sun came up. And then about 8 to 10 in the morning, we would land back. Back at.
So you just basically wanted to be on watch when it went down.
I wanted to be, in that time frame when things happen.
Yeah.
And that's what happened, right? So on the 19th of March, we think that we were actually full-blown Western Iraq scud hunting starting about the 15th of March. I may have my date off by a day or two, but things are happening. The war has kind of kicked off with folks crossing the border, but the big-time air war doesn't start until the 19th. And on the 19th of March, I'm on a patrol. And the first thing I notice is, things are getting really busy on the radio. Mm-hmm. I think a two-ship there were some other F-16s up towards Baghdad. We were avoiding Baghdad because Baghdad was like Indian country, man. It was bad. It was bad juju. All the intelligence said they're going to protect their capital. They've got all these radar missiles. We're ready for them to shoot salvos and salvos of radar-guided missiles to us. They don't do it. They shoot some, but it's not like the intelligence tells us. They just basically shoot a couple of missiles. We shoot back some harms. The harms guide. The missiles, the missile sites go down. And the Iraqis quickly figure out that the American Air Force, the harm targeting system in the Block 50 F-16 is a formidable threat. And if they turn their radar on, they're going to die. Yeah. So they kind of stopped doing that, right? But on the 19th of March, relatively benign sortie for a good part of it. And as I'm flying towards the tanker, we start getting, my wingman and I get shot at. And, when I say get shot at it, we're flying over an encampment. We're 20,000 feet, but I can see tracers kind of coming in our general direction.
So this is just dumb anti-aircraft, like 20 millimeter.
There's no radar at all, but they're shooting in our general direction. And then looking at Baghdad, you can see things light up. There's more shooting.
And what is the altitude range of those anti-aircraft cannons?
From what I saw at the time, it was probably 10, 15,000 feet below me. It really wasn't a threat. I mean, if things are moving on your canopy, they're not a threat, right? Where you have to worry is when things are stationary, because that means you're on a collision course. That's right. how you can tell. But I could just sort of, first thing I'm like, oh, I'm getting shot at. It was like a fascinating thing.
That's an interesting concept. We got the same thing in the Navy at sea, right? It's constant bearing, decreasing range.
Right. It's exactly
is that what you call it?
Constant bearing, decreasing range.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you have constant bearing, decreasing range with a missile or a bullet, that's
or
the
a
problem.
ship or a buoy.
You got to change something.
Yeah.
Right? You got to change the attitude or altitude of your airplane. So,
right, exactly.
So the war is now afoot.
So did you just get a call on the radio that said, "Hey, go time to blow something up, go find something"?
So yeah, it would have been nice.
Because that would be fun to be in the cockpit.
So now the frustrating
part
part happens is we're loaded with harms for another week, and from the 19th of March until about the late March, maybe the 25th, 28th, and I make a decision talking to command and control. I go, we're shooting some harms around the clock. Occasionally something happens, and my wingman shoots a couple based on point outs that we get, but never a reactive shot. He never shoots a reactive shot because they just, when we're up, they're not pointing their radars at us, right? So I make a command decision. We're going to go to a mixed load, like you see on this, where one of the wingman pair is going to have bombs, the other is going to have harms. And now things get a little more interesting. As our intelligence gathers, here's a surface-to-air missile site. It may or may not be on, but I want you to take it out. They give us coordinates. We go find it. Sometimes the weather's bad, and sometimes I don't see anything. I end up dropping a bomb on the cloud,
right,
based on the best intelligence that we have. But we shoot a harm at it anyway because we can use that coordinate, and in case it comes up, the harm will guide at the end game. And if it doesn't come up, the harm will get close, but that won't do all the damage, so I drop a bomb on it just to be sure.
So now, why would you split up the harms and JDAMs across planes? Why wouldn't you just say, hey, this one's half and half?
Why wouldn't I have one harm and one JDAM?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, you said like my wingman would have bombs and I'd have arms or whatever.
Yeah, the other way around.
Why wouldn't you just have
generally
mixed weapons
it's because
on a
of the best way to explain it is, first of all, I'm not 100% certain that the airplane was cleared to carry a harm, which is a pretty big missile. You saw a picture of it, and a JDAM at the same time. I think later we got that clearance, but mixed load clearances were hard to come by.
Interesting.
JDAMs were new. And so we were, harms we'd had for a while, and the harm targeting system we'd had for a while, but JDAMs were new. I mean, they were like, we were learning things while we were dropping JDAMs. Not a lot had been dropped. In fact, we had just started training with them probably a year earlier before we deployed, a year and a half earlier in earnest. So
that was the deal. Harm. If the radar didn't come on, the JDAM would finish that.
Yeah, and sometimes both. Sometimes harm and JDAM. And so we employed, a lot of times this was with that coalition picture you had up there a second ago, Andy. I don't think we have a, you can
That's a cool
see.
shot.
That was a cool shot. So this was sort of a hero shot we took near the end of my deployment there. But these were all the airplanes that were at LUD during this.
That's not everybody just trying to hit that tanker. That's a staged shot.
It's a totally staged shot. But we had Strike Eagles from Seymour Johnson. We had a tanker. We had obviously the 117 there. And the foreground, so the foreground's an F-18 Hornet, but it was actually not a Navy F-18, it was an Australian F-18. In fact, my roommate, my tent mate was Mel Upfeld, ended up becoming the chief of the Australian Air Force, but he was a squadron commander of 79 Squadron, 29 Squadron, the Magpies. It was the right designation, but yeah, so we had some coalition folks there. We had Tornadoes from the UK, and the base. This little tiny base, this tent city, became a big deal, but we still didn't have buildings. We left it.
Always tents.
Yeah, and so there's
where did you guys store your munitions?
There was a munition storage area. There's plenty of desert. Plenty of the thing. There's a picture of me in front of an airplane with two maintenance guys. You see that one? Let me just talk about them for a second. So this particular Block 50 F-16, I went out on a sortie, and that airplane logged 4,000 hours. It was the first Block 50, I think, to cross 4,000 hours. We were flying long sorties.
Yeah.
The airplane's designed, we're flying every jet, every day, a couple times a day. We're flying 24/7. We went through 61 straight days of combat operations.
And you said you're hitting the tanker at least twice.
At least. And many times, there were a couple sorties where I hit the tanker 5 times.
Wow.
We ended up setting up a phase dock, a major depot overhaul dock. Every 100 hours or 200 hours, you had to do a phase inspection, which was kind of a big deal. You're pulling panels off and everything. It's an overhaul, major overhaul. We set up a phase dock where we had 2 airplanes in a phase dock because we're putting hours on the airplane so fast. And so guys like Sergeant Campbell, or Airman Campbell, and I think it was Sergeant Wilson, who was a production super on this particular sortie.
Those guys were working pretty hard too.
Those guys were humping, man. I mean, and it's 120 degrees out there.
Yeah.
There's not shade or anything, and it was. So it's a testament to them.
Yeah.
We ended up with 24 airplanes. We had 91 pilots. We had probably 300 pilots and maintainers and administrative folks from Spangdahlem Air Base, Germany, and it was the biggest seed squadron ever, right? So, and I dropped some bombs. There's some most of the stories were kind of benign. There was a lot of boredom, and there was some sheer terror for about 10 seconds here and there.
Okay, so you had sheer terror for 10 seconds. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so one time we're going to the tanker, and the tanker wasn't where he was supposed to be, and there were 2 or 3 flights trying to find this tanker that wasn't where he was supposed to be, and we're in and out of clouds, and my wingman and I were flying close, and we get and you're not supposed to lock the tanker up. It gets the tankers nervous when you have live weapons, but you lock them up with your radar.
Because you're looking for them.
They get tensed up, right? Yeah, you're looking for them. So you're trying to do this without locking anybody up, and there's a break in the clouds. I see the tanker, and then literally about, I don't know, probably 500 feet, but it might have been 200 or 300 feet. Another 2 ship goes sitting right below us. I'm just like, what? Had no idea they were there. They were looking for the same tanker we were. Command and control didn't tell us about them.
Yeah.
It was that kind of stuff. You just kind of like, holy cow, man! I almost got, here I am in combat. I almost hit another airplane, just looking for the tanker in a relatively benign scenario.
I'll tell you, it's interesting you bring that because I've heard a lot of stories here at this club.
Yeah.
That revolve around pilots looking for the tanker and being like, oh, is this tanker?
Right.
I think there was this guy just had to land in some, I can't remember the specifics of the story, but it ended where he had to land at some airfield in Kuwait, and there's just like 2 Marines that are like sitting under a tarp. They're like, hey, what's up? They're like, I'm out of gas.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Gas truck's coming tomorrow.
We diverted guys into Kuwait. We diverted 2 guys into a special operations airfield in western Iraq because one of them had an engine indication that wasn't right. In a single engine airplane, you take those things seriously. Yeah. I can't remember if he had 0 oil pressure or something. So they land, and I don't see these guys for like 3 weeks because we can't get them apart. It's literally way out in the middle of nowhere. And finally, we get the right maintenance guys and right parts. Maybe it was less than 3 weeks, but it was a while. And they basically they fly like you saw me. I'm just hunkered down. They've got their stuff. They got a survival kit. They might have a candy bar in their pocket. They might have a bottle of Gatorade, and that's it. So they're sleeping in a cot, whatever they can find, in a tent, and just hanging out, waiting.
It's funny
growing a beard.
That's the terror results from logistics.
Oh, totally.
That's a logistics thing, you know.
That's what they say. Amateurs talk about tactics, pros talk about logistics.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
Because if you nail your logistics, the actual act of no matter what you're doing,
right,
it goes smooth.
It's like taking care of those airplanes.
Because you're ready, and go everything from diving to mountain climbing to whatever. If you got all your ducks in a row, if you trained properly, when you actually do the thing that you went to do, no problem.
Yeah.
But where you get terrified is when you get bent out of shape because you're
when you don't have the gas,
up.
you don't have the food,
yeah.
you don't have the tents.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. You're not
you don't
prepared.
Have we talked about having the latrines, right? I mean, it was just little things like that.
I thought you said there was a lot of desert, right? So
There's a lot of desert
everywhere.
Hey, show that 4-ship picture you had a second ago. I just want to show that, and then we'll talk a little bit about test pilot flying because I know we need to. Probably, so this is a cool picture. This is Spangdahlem Air Base F-16s. Super squadron. You got 2 of them loaded with harms, 2 of them loaded with bombs, and this was our basic fighting unit. And there's blue tails and red tails mixed up in there. So the 23rd and 22nd, all under the banner of the 22nd Expeditionary Fighter Squadron. Just love the picture from that standpoint. And this is like
that is cool.
You don't mess with, the F-16 is an old airplane. But I tell you, you felt awfully powerful when you walked out the door and you had a 4-ship of Vipers loaded for bear like this. Do not F with me because I'm going to bring the heat, man. And it was badass. I mean, it was really that's the coolest thing about flying fighters.
So you went from that highly operational flying the F-16.
I went to school.
You went to school.
I went to school. So I go to school. I go to the War College. To get educated.
Where's that?
It's in Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama, the Air War College. I'm in a seminar. We're learning about geopolitics. I get a master's degree in strategic studies. But the cool thing there are a lot of cool things about going to war. It was a relaxing assignment. My youngest son, who's 16, will be on Sunday. He'll be 16. Was born the first month we were there in Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. So, and I play a lot of guitar, and I'm just kind of chilling and going to school and studying. But one of the cool things I do at school is regional studies. All the U.S. students, so there's an international component, take a seminar where they study a region of the world. And I was in the best seminar ever, which was East Asia, basically China and Hong Kong. And so we're studying. We have a Chinese guy who's our professor. And then in the latter part of the year, we go on a 2-week trip to China and to Hong Kong. So there's a picture of me with a Chinese guy giving. So I'm in China with, I think it was a seminar probably of 12 officers. This is me and we go to Chinese Air Force bases. They put us on a 737. They take us good care of us, wine us and dine us. The scary part is everywhere we go, we have a ceremonial dinner. And they had a huge table with probably 50 people sitting around it. And ceremonial dinners mean you have to do ceremonial toasts. And you have to have Mao Tai, which is basically firewater,
Yeah.
Chinese, very, very strong liquor. And you have to take a toast, a drink with everybody at the table, Ganbei, and you're drinking and you're taking a shot. But we go to a couple of Air Force bases and you really get an inside look. And there's a picture of me next to a J-8, which was kind of a F-16 equivalent. But I'm a student of the Cold War, and this is the People's Republic, and I'm right there. And they were very welcoming, very, very interesting people. We trained to fight them.
Everything's okay. Let's not go to war here.
But everything's cool, and I was fascinated by the culture. The people were extremely cool. We end up in Hong Kong. It's our last, and what I'm watching today in Hong Kong is just really unfortunate because we really got a sense for the difference going from mainland China to Hong Kong and being there and conversing with the authorities there on how different the culture, the political situation was at the time. But that was a great.
Because for a while it seemed like they were just going to leave Hong Kong alone.
Yeah,
that was the idea, right?
It was totally the idea until
Let's just
2047.
leave it alone.
That's the plan.
And
97
its own
to
thing.
50 years of its own autonomy, but we don't talk about politics on this show. But
I don't know if we could talk. I think we could talk about other places' politics.
Yeah.
As a study, as a cultural study.
One of the places I really, really wanted to take my wife that I've been a chance to go and she was Hong Kong, and my kids too. We haven't gone. Now it's going to be interesting to see if we can go. I just think I think it's really concerning what's happening over there as far as democracy.
So do you think the sleeping giant analogy is accurate for China?
What's the sleeping giant analogy?
Don't awaken him. I mean, from what I've heard and what I've seen, this is just my opinion. I don't think they're ready for a war. But if they ever did get ready for a war, it would not be good for anybody.
Yeah, gosh. The interesting thing about studying China, we're so intertwined economically with them.
Right.
I mean, a war would be just disastrous, right? Disastrous for them, for us. Militarily, they're getting more ready. And that's the thing I've studied. And then my next assignment after I went to school, I went to the test organization and was the operational test pilot for a couple of years there. And we trained against the very highest end, leading edge of Chinese and Russian hardware, right? We didn't train against the actual hardware, but we trained tactics. We built tactics against that capability.
So our intelligence would figure out basically where we're at technologically.
Right. Yeah. Show that picture again of me with a helmet on in the green, right? Or either one. So this is at Nellis Air Force Base. So I go to school.
And Nellis is what state again?
I'm sorry, Nevada.
Nevada,
It's right north of Las Vegas.
That's right.
Nellis is the home of the fighter pilot for the Air Force. It is where the United States Air Force Weapons School is. You heard of Top Gun. Weapons School is like Top Gun on steroids. It is where Red Flag is, which is where the Operation Red Flag is where every pilot goes to hone their skills, Air Force pilot and the Navy and other coalition, to hone their skills. So we do training, we do tactics development, and then the 53rd Wing, and specifically the 53rd Test and Evaluation Group. I was the deputy commander for fighters of that organization for a couple of years.
So let's back up. Explain to me exactly what it means to be a test pilot. Because when I think test pilot, I think like Chuck Yeager or that guy in the flying saucer,
Yeah, right.
That's like trying to get this thing to fly. Or like astronauts where they're like, well, I don't know if we can go this fast. Let's see what happens, and that's a test pilot.
Yeah, so there's developmental test and there's operational test.
So what I just described, what kind of test pilot is that?
That's probably more developmental test. When you go to test pilot school, you learn a developmental test, which is essentially, and the lines are blurrier now. If you ever watch The Right Stuff, and in the 50s and 60s, we were testing a brand new airplane.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out if it can fly.
If it can fly. And people died because the airplane didn't fly. The engineers didn't figure out that, hey, this won't work, right, in this airplane. Things are significantly safer now. But developmental test really ascertains whether an airplane meets the basic flying qualities and specifications that it was purchased for. And there's some weapons testing, but the weapons testing is generally associated with will the airplane carry the weapon safely, and will the weapon separate from the airplane safely, and will the essential targeting information be passed to the weapon
But
correctly?
it sounds like it's more of a validation thing these days, right?
Absolutely.
Because when I think test pilot, and I think when a lot of people do, they're like, well, they say it'll go Mach 1.2. Let's
Now
see.
we're going to see if it does.
But now they're saying, yeah, it goes 1.2,
Yeah.
and you're getting in the cockpit to just check. Yes, it does.
Well, sure. Simulation and modeling has gotten so good. The computers will tell you, the models will tell you that the airplane should do this speed. And yes, you are going to verify that. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go through the whole envelope, and it doesn't mean that's not dangerous. It is.
Mm-hmm.
But that's developmental test flying. Operational test flying, which I did at Nellis, is basically taking that developmental test product and then determining whether it is suitable and there's the other word. It's capable and suitable. Capable may not be the right word for combat operations. And it also involves taking those capabilities and developing tactics to use those capabilities in a fine manner, right? In a effective.
So like figuring out how to fight the aircraft.
Exactly. Figuring out how to fight the aircraft.
Here it is. This is what it can do. Now let's figure out how to fight it.
So the F-16 has been around a long time. There's not much developmental test flying that happens with F-16s as the airframe goes. But what does happen is you get a new software load, right? And we go through a developmental test to ensure that software load doesn't induce any weird flight control
Because it is
problems.
fly-by-wire.
Because it is fly-by-wire. And assuming that happens, then we take that software load in the operational test community and ensure, and then say, okay, does it do all the things with respect to combat employment that it's supposed to do? And some of that involves regression testing, which means we knew it could do this before. Let's make sure it still can do that. And then some of it involves development of new tactics, i.e. in verifying that the new capabilities that are supposed to be in that software load are actually there, and then developing the tactics to use those new capabilities.
Interesting.
So, it's a lot of gobbledygook, I know.
I mean, it's important, though. I mean,
So what do we do?
famously, the big guys had a problem with that 737 MAX, right?
Yeah, right. That's a great example, right? Because had that gone through the developmental test regime that maybe the Air Force would have put it through.
Someone would have been like,
somebody would have
"What's
gone,
this?"
Yeah, in a weird attitude.
Yeah.
There's this weird situation happens. Now, I showed those as distinctions, developmental, operational, but the lines are kind of blurry. We in the operational test community got involved in developmental testing early on, and that allowed us to help shape that testing to ensure that it made sense. And the developmental test community did a little bit of, preliminary operational testing. So it wasn't such a fine line, brick wall. There was a lot of collaboration between those communities.
Developmental testing, though, that's kind of like what you do before you sign the check. I mean, I know that's not technically how it works. We probably sign the check anyway.
Yeah.
But the
that's
thought process is like,
Right.
we're making sure that you delivered what we're paying you for.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool things that I did when I was in the operational test community, targeting pods. Let's just talk about that for a second. You were asking me about close air support.
Yeah.
So these fancy targeting pods, go to the two-ship at sunset. So we tested if you look at that green thing in the middle, right, that's kind of hanging off the nose, the Sniper advanced targeting pod and the Lightning advanced targeting pod. And both of these had amazing capabilities. Now they can video data link. We use these, when I flew in combat and I was dropping JDAMs, I had to get someone else to give me coordinates so that I could load those coordinates in the JDAM so that the JDAM could find the target.
And when you say that, you mean you had to type that GPS number in?
Yes, exactly. To the thousandth, right? The latitude, longitude to the thousandth.
And the thousandth, how close does that get you at the thousandth latitude?
6 feet?
6 feet? Yeah, so that's enough.
Yeah, 6 feet. It's pretty good.
But that's
somebody's
three.
Going to check. Somebody in the audience is going to check my math.
That's 5 digits. That's 5 digits.
I'm sticking with
and
6 feet though.
But that's 5 digits for latitude and
Yeah.
6 digits for longitude. Right? 'Cause
I
you
think
go
the
to
digits were the same. It was degrees, minutes, and thousandths of minutes. So minutes point XXX.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we didn't do seconds. We did it in minutes to the thousandth.
Well, I think
Easier for me to say.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
the way
minutes to 1,000. So it'd be like 38.5
point XXX. Or
XXX.
Point, yeah, right.
Yeah. But
So-
you'd have to finger that. You'd have to
Well, not
type that
only
in.
so you're right. You had to finger that in, but not only do you have to finger. Actually, there was a way. If you walked out the door with the target in your digital transfer cartridge, you could just type it in on the ground.
Your thumb drive.
Yeah, your thumb drive, right, ginormous thumb drive. Plug it in, and it goes to the bomb. But that's half the problem. But the other half of the problem is that I relied on an off-board source, right? An off-board source. Think about that. So
Yeah, someone's got to say, hey, hit
somebody
this GPS
else has
target.
to say, here's your target. You know.
So before you had that
Viper
pod,
1-1.
you couldn't just point to a spot on the ground and be like, I want to hit that. And now
Well, you asked that question. There is a way to drop a JDAM visually, and I dropped a
you can. Yeah, maybe for a OV10 guy, right?
for an F-16 to drop a JDAM visually. What you had to do is you had to point to a spot on the ground using your symbology, slew a box on the ground against the target, and then drop the JDAM so that it would fly at the time. This probably has changed, but it would have less than 22 seconds of flight. Because if it had 22 seconds or more of flight, that's when it would usually acquire the GPS signal, and that could introduce an error to the bomb based on, from where you intended to aim it. Mm-hmm. What you're essentially doing is you're dropping the JDAM, you're sending it coordinates based on where your symbology is on the ground, and then you're dropping it, and it's going to go to those coordinates, and it won't try to refine those coordinates unless it gets a GPS signal, and then it will try to refine it, right? So I actually did that while I was in combat. I dropped basically on an enemy position visually. And that was the most, of all my combat sorties, that was probably the most satisfying sortie, because I actually dropped 2 bombs. I dropped a wind-corrected munition dispenser of cluster bombs on the same target to do close air support for some Army coalition troops. I say it was satisfying because this is the only time I saw the bomb blow up, and enemy scatter as a result of that bomb blow up. But the rest of my bomb dropping was generally on target coordinates. So fast forward, I'm in test, right? And now with this fancy targeting pod, the targeting pod was so good that I could generate coordinates using the targeting pod. I could put the targeting pod on a tank, let's say, or a building.
Right.
And it would, using the GPS in my airplane and the accuracy of the laser and the pod itself and the camera and the zoom capability of the camera, generate my own coordinates. And I would take those coordinates, put them in the bomb, and now I could drop a bomb. I could self-designate.
Did you still have to type them in?
Did I still have to type them in? No, I think digitally we transferred the data.
That's nice.
But
because I know there's stuff like that all over the military, where it's like, wait, how come this system it's right here? It's right here.
Yeah,
Wait,
talk to each
No,
other.
you got to read off that screen, and you got to
Right.
type it in over here.
Should be fairly straightforward, right?
Yeah.
So that was one of the cool things. Now, that's mundane work. In order for us to certify a brand new lieutenant who's right out of pilot training to do that, we need to make sure in a variety of conditions that when I generate coordinates using this new targeting pod software or new targeting pod, that those coordinates are accurate enough to put in a JDAM, and the JDAM goes where it needs to. So we did an awful lot of flying over targets, generating coordinates, and having stacks and stacks of coordinates, and then going back and analyze. Our engineer analysts would verify that against the truth data and go, yes, you were close enough. You're within 6 feet. Okay, good.
Right.
And over and over again. Okay, this
So now,
tactic
did
works.
you help develop those test protocols too?
Yeah.
Like in terms of this is a scenario. Oh, we're missing a scenario.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah.
Because I'm sure the engineers give you some sort of package.
Before we
They're
did
like,
a test, we had to develop the protocols.
Yeah.
And then we had test clearances. We had test readiness reviews. We had, the airplane never flies unless the paperwork is as heavy as the airplane. That's sort of the rule of thumb, right?
I wonder how accurate is that? I know that's what would you call that? That's
some sort of
not an analogy, but
fable. I don't know.
Yeah,
I can't remember
how
the word.
true is it?
It's
Like if you actually added up so now things are digital.
Yeah.
However, I know that the
There's
military
always
likes
paper,
to print
man.
stuff.
We print stuff. We print stuff.
I wonder how close it is.
don't
The
know.
aircraft doesn't fly unless the
paper-
paperwork's as heavy.
That was a joke we used to
It might
say.
not be a
But
joke.
it may be true.
It might not be.
The other cool thing, so I'll just, one more cool story.
Yeah,
When
and
I
then we're
was-
going to do some questions after this too, because I'm sure
Oh, we
we've got
are.
some
Oh my
viewers.
gosh.
So
we're pushing. Yeah, let me just wrap.
We're
pushing 2 hours.
Fine. Oh, we are? Oh god.
7:45, right? Is that when we started?
Yeah, it's good.
It's 9:45.
Interesting
I think my
conversations
wife
take
is
some
gone.
time.
Yeah, this time I've heard this story before. She was going to watch, but she's
So this
probably-
goes up as podcast too, so you can listen to yourself on a podcast.
It's just what I want to do.
Yeah,
I
you
usually
know,
listen. I listen to a lot of podcasts.
How
I
long's
listen
your
to-
commute?
Well, right now it's pretty. It's 10. I'm sorry, it's
10
30
minutes?
30 minutes.
Okay.
30 minutes. So yeah,
So you can get through this in a week.
I could get through this in a week, but I listen to 1.5 speed. So,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to listen to myself. In fact, it'll be. Well, anyway, I
Yeah.
digress. Let's. So Raptor, right? We talked about the F-22 Raptor. It's a bad airplane.
Yeah.
Right. Best.
So you got to fly that too.
I didn't get to fly the Raptor. The Raptor's single seat, and we had limited training opportunities.
Yeah.
But when I was at the 53rd TEG as the deputy commander for fighters, I oversaw Raptor testing that included the initial operational capability testing, right? So initial operational test and evaluation. And one of the cool things I did was fly with Raptors a lot in my F-16. And we did, the Air Force bought 187 of them. They were supposed to buy 400, I think. 3 big number, 387, I think. Anyway, when it became obvious that we weren't going to buy that many, it became more obvious that in order for the Air Force, the coalition, to get the best out of a Raptor, we needed to develop tactics where 1 or 2 F-22s would fly with 4 legacy fighters. That's what they call old airplanes.
Yeah.
The F-16s. F-15Es, Strike Eagles, or F-15Cs, the light gray Eagles. And so I flew a lot of those tactics development missions. And I flew against Raptors a lot too. And that's really, you think, I showed you that picture of the 4-ship, right?
Yeah.
And I go, I'm bad, right? I'm flying in a 4-ship.
You got a Raptor in there too.
Dude, well, it depends. If I'm acting as an adversary against a Raptor, I never see the Raptor and I die. That's how it works. I mean, and it's eye-watering in a beyond visual range situation. That's how it worked. We would go out against the Raptors, never see them on our radar, and we die. Simulated, right?
Right.
We don't actually die, but they would go against 8. There would be 2 of them against 8, 16, 24. 4 of them against 24. They'd kill everybody. They would never die. We would never see them.
crazy.
Yeah, because they literally, they're not invisible, but they're really, really hard to see on radar. They weren't as, I couldn't see them on an S-16 radar. So that was an eye-opener. But then to the point about the integrated tactics, it would be a 4 F-16s. I would be leading a 4-ship of F-16. I would have a 2-ship of F-22s with me. And they would start out, they would shoot all their missiles because they could, and then they would use our missiles. And they would just tell us. They would see things well before we would, and they would direct the fight. It would be the traffic cops back there, but they're awesome radar, and they would say, hey, here's, target this group, target this group, target this group, and then we would go do it, and we would just wail, and it was so cool because we would, in these test scenarios, the adversaries would put up 24. Now, it would generally be 8 or 16 airplanes, but they would recycle. Every time they would get killed, they would tag up to a regeneration point, come back out into the airspace, regenerate. So you would go through a scenario of a vulnerability period of, let's say, a half an hour, and you might face 24, 36 adversaries, and we'd kill them all. Kill them all. You'd run out of missiles before you ran out of targets.
That's crazy.
But the capability was just amazing. And then I had the eye-watering experience of dogfighting a Raptor against a guy who was a lieutenant in my squadron when I was in Germany. He was now a Raptor pilot, he was a captain, great guy, Goat Allen. And he's like, yeah, boss, we're gonna go fly. He called me boss because I was a colonel, he was a captain, and we went out and did dissimilar basic fighter maneuvers, dissimilar dogfighting tactics. I would be behind the Raptor. I'm like, all right, man, here we go. I'm going to kill you. As soon as the fight's on, with its vectored thrust, it would go from here to like there, and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm getting a face full of raptor. I can't get a shot off in time. Passes me. I'm turning like a banshee, and next thing you know, he's behind me, and I'm dead.
That's crazy.
Jeez. And so, as cool as
why
that,
did we only buy 140 of these things?
187.
187.
Because they were expensive.
How much were they a pop?
They started out. 100,
Yeah, they always start out.
No, here's the thing. They do. They start out really expensive. I don't remember. I'm going to get my numbers wrong. But the probably the initial one, the first one off the line was probably 200 million, and the last one off the line was probably 100 million. The cheapest ones are the last ones you buy, because when you're amortizing that development cost over a number of different airplanes, the more you buy, the cheaper they get.
Sure.
And the other thing that happens is you come down what's called a learning curve when you build them. The first ones to build are the hardest.
Yeah.
The more
and this
you
is all
build,
on cost plus, right?
Yeah, I don't know the contracting mechanism. The development is typically cost plus, but then we go to firm fixed price when we start building in rate.
Yeah.
But the bottom line was, the Secretary Gates at the time made a decision. The Air Force was part of that decision. They didn't want to stop buying Raptors. I think there was some belief that we could keep past that number, but we didn't. So.
But I mean, like for the general rule of thumb is a Tomahawk missile is $1 million.
Yeah.
Right. So it's 100 Tomahawks.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a platform and it's not a missile.
Piece. Yeah, and it's go see a Raptor at an air show.
Pretty
water
legit.
Water your eyes.
Yeah.
Water your eyes. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm glad America, man.
Yeah, America.
I'm like, glad we have those.
Yeah.
Glad we have those.
Now
Anyway.
and then we got this guy.
And then we got this guy. The F-35 is an awesome airplane in its own right. It's better than the Raptor in a lot of ways. It's not as good in other ways. It was optimized in design for air-to-ground attack more than air-to-air combat. But it's a great air-to-air combat airplane. And it carries missiles internally, very hard to see on radar. Mm-hmm. It's great airplane too.
So let's take some questions from the chat.
Take some questions.
We got a couple.
Oh my gosh,
a lot of
man.
questions. You see how many fingers you got? We have 8 questions.
Do we have 8 questions? Okay. So are you going to read them?
Let's do the good ones, Andy. Let's encourage people. No, he's just going to read them off.
Okay.
For sure.
And then we're going to.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you.
Lovely to see all your smiling faces in the chat. First question comes from the very start of the stream from Serious Improv, and they want to know Top Gun and The Right Stuff. How much do they get right, and how much do they get wrong?
Both formative movies. If you haven't read the book Right Stuff, highly, highly encourage people to read it. So The Right Stuff came out when I was in high school, college, I want to say, late 70s, early 80s. Read the book, loved the movie. What they got right, and then Top Gun came out while I was in pilot training. So I wasn't an operational fighter pilot for either, and I wasn't a test pilot for either, right?
When they came out.
When they came out. What they got right is the swagger, the sense of being invincible, the ego,
Yeah.
What they got wrong. It's been a while since I watched The Right Stuff, but really the aura of a couple things. The aura of invincibility that you have, the belief that bad stuff might happen to pilots, but it ain't going to happen to me, because I'm good. I'm better than that. I'm not going to screw that up. That whole, the hatch just blew. This whole conversation in Top Gun about, in The Right Stuff about what if the machine breaks? Well, the machine doesn't break, and if the machine does break, I'm better than the machine, and I'm going to fix the machine, and I'll bring it home safely.
Yeah.
And so that is absolutely spot on, right? And sort of the daring do that. The scene on the carrier when they find Alan Shepard, the two guys are throwing up, and they go, you want to do this? And he goes, I don't know, is it dangerous? And he goes, very. And he goes, I'm in. And so that is absolutely spot on. And the same with the ego in Top Gun. What they got wrong in Top Gun, they did for Hollywood purposes. Flying around in a dogfight without your mask on.
Yeah.
It's completely bogus. You want to get airplanes in the same frame, right, when you got a movie.
Yeah.
So there's all this very close-in fighting. Real dogfights happen, even visual range dogfights, you're a couple miles apart. you
Yeah.
know, and the other airplane is a spec.
But for Hollywood, you got to get close.
But for Hollywood, you got to be really close, right?
Well, it's good to know that they got the attitude down, even though
They
it
totally
is
got the attitude down.
You know,
And-
you know what the most accurate submarine movie ever made is?
Das Boot.
No.
No.
I mean, it's high on the list, right?
Yeah.
But if you ask a submariner
Yeah.
what the best submarine movie is,
Red October?
no.
Okay, you tell me.
Interesting.
I'm fishing.
It's Down Periscope.
Really?
Yeah, because they got the attitude right.
They got the attitude
Because if you're on a boat,
Yeah.
people are going to mess with you.
Yeah.
that's it. They're like, yeah, you know, all the, because again, the stuff with the Hunt Red October
Yeah.
or Crimson Tide or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
where they're going through the canyon or whatever, it's and none of that. They do it all for Hollywood.
Yeah.
So it's all about the attitude, right?
Well, and that's the other thing about Top Gun is, you know, the singing, the camaraderie at the bar, the playing piano, you know, all of that was spot on. I mean, because that's
Yeah.
really, you know, that was the funnest. That wasn't the fun. There's a lot of fun parts about being a fighter pilot, but that's definitely up there. You know, singing songs, remembering the heritage, you know, and paying tribute to the heritage is amazing. So anyway, next question.
Next
maybe.
question, yeah.
What is your call sign and how did you get it?
My call sign is Moose and NSFW, and it's not a great story, but it's not a story I'm going to tell here. So
Not safe for work, huh?
Not safe for work, but I'll tell you, you know, I'm not really a big guy. A lot of guys named Moose are like 6'5" and 300 pounds.
Yeah, that's why it's not safe for work.
But yeah, exactly. But I will tell you, I was accused, or it rang true for a lot of folks because I was told bull moose in the china shop often, and I'd get riled up about things, and so
Yeah.
that was it. Kind of stuck after the story. That's not safe for work.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, what else we got, Andy?
Next question is from Larry Stern, and Larry wants to know, what is the average time for a mid-air refuel?
That's interesting.
Well, you mean how long it takes? I'm assuming he.
Yeah,
means?
like probably once you hook up, right? Because you know
Yeah.
you got some
Yeah.
jockeying around, waiting.
Yeah, so you might know, Larry might know, that there's two types of refueling operations in the air. There's the boom refueling, and there's the probe and drogue refueling. The boom refueling is, the Navy uses probe and drogue, and some Air Force helicopters do. But the boom refueling was chosen as the refueling method of choice by the Air Force because of flow rate. It was you could get a much higher flow rate with a boom. So I've never refueled with a probe and drogue. I can't give you any data on that time. But I could put a 4-ship across in about 20 minutes, and that's topping off. So
when you say
everybody's
4-ship, that's
That's 4
a
airplanes.
flight of 4 airplanes.
Flight of 4 airplanes.
And you can hit that tanker that whole flight.
The presumption here is
in 20
I've
minutes.
taken about, you know, what did an F-16 carry? About 11,000 pounds of gas when you start up. You're probably down to 9 or 8,000 after you've taken off in afterburner with a full load of bombs and everything. I get to a tanker, it's probably a 20, 30-minute flight to get there. So I'm putting probably 4,000 pounds across each airplane, and I could probably do that in 20 minutes. And we would do what's called quick flow refueling. So you would, and calm out, you know, you don't want to communicate if you can, right? So the first airplane would come down, it would be on the boom, and while it was on the boom, the second airplane would be right next to it. As soon as the first airplane was full of gas, you would click off, you would disconnect by using a button on your stick and move away, and the next airplane would slide right in there. And you had to be, you know, a good pilot to do this because you had to stay perfectly still while the boom operator stuck you, so to speak. The flow started, and then the next airplane would come down. And yeah, so that's a great question because one of the biggest planning factors is the amount of booms available and how long it takes to get everybody across those booms. So if you didn't pay, logistics,
pretty fast, though.
it's logistics. Yeah, but that's a 4-ship, and that's actually on the wing, right? If you messed around and you took a long time to find the tanker, you throw the whole thing off.
Right.
And a lot of times you would get to a tanker and there'd be a 4-ship on one wing, there'd be another 4-ship on
And
one
why do you
wing.
want to do this without radio?
because you don't want every radio emission, every radar emission gives away your position, gives away the force strength. It's all this. It's operational security reasons.
Huh.
Yeah. So quite.
It's
better.
interesting that I've learned this tonight. It doesn't seem like we have our radio game as secure as I thought it would be.
It's good. It's secure.
I understand the concept.
I mean, I
but
gave you
not
some
as,
anecdotes.
Yeah, not as not as encrypted as I thought, and not as untraceable and unjammable as I thought it would be.
Well, remember, my stories are 20 years ago, right? So
Yeah.
things are probably.
But I
better.
would think, if there's would you call it a four?
Our four ship.
Four ship?
Yeah.
If there's a four ship, and everybody's chattering on the radio, I wouldn't think that would give away how many planes. I would imagine it would give away that there is a plane. But
Yeah.
If there's four of them, I would imagine that their signals would all look the same.
So let's talk about
from 10
culture
miles
for
away.
just a second. It goes back to the other thing. One of the things that you strive to do as a fighter pilot is to train yourself not to use words, right? Brevity communications is, and people that are around fighter pilots will go, well, that's BS because fighter pilots talk a lot when they're at the bar or whatever. but on the radio, you really would strive to be extremely disciplined, regardless of whether you had these encryption devices enabled or not enabled, whether you could be heard or not heard, whether if you got heard it mattered or didn't matter, because it was just sort of a cultural thing.
Interesting.
To not talk, not yak on the radio. In fact, you were admonished.
Everybody knows what everybody's doing, and everybody just does it.
Yep.
That's
visual signals. Use to the max extent possible. Use visual signals. Use standards, so you don't have to tell people we're doing this standard because they know what the standards are.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a cultural thing inbred, because in the possibility that your encryption devices don't work or that people can hear you, now you're trained not to use them.
Right.
It's like a day without communications, and we're doing that a day without GPS. We're getting to the point where GPS we're super reliant upon. We're super reliant upon data link.
Yeah.
Right now, data link is amazing.
Heard the GPS constellation isn't doing so well.
Yeah, I've read recent reports about that. But I tell you what, if you think about doing a day without GPS. Think about navigating in the city in your car without GPS.
Well, right now I go 2 places a week, and that's here in the grocery store.
Probably have it memorized.
Yeah, I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
But no, normally, that's you pick up the phone.
Right.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. All right, next question.
Yeah.
Next question is, were there any sort of shenanigans or pranks between squadrons on base? Did you ever mess with each other?
Oh yeah.
And what were some of them?
Oh yeah.
Now you're going to ask me what were some of them. Boy.
Yeah, the red tail, blue tail. thing
Yeah,
going on, right?
yeah, some of that. I mean, so gosh, some of this is NSFW, not safe for work. Some of it got a little ugly. The rivalry thing. Generally, what you tried to do in a healthy rivalry is you tried to show up stronger. So it was generally like we have more people at the club, at the bar. We're singing louder than you guys. The competition was in bombing competitions or whatever. We would do that. I'm trying to think about outright pranks that we did.
The best one I've ever seen. I wasn't responsible for
Yeah.
this, but some guys some guys and girls from my class. They surfaced a submarine at the Air Force Academy. You can probably pull that picture up, Andy. It's famous, but the academy has a big green lawn out in front of the chapel.
Yeah.
It's a pretty iconic chapel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they built a submarine for Navy Air Force Week.
Yeah.
And great prank.
Yeah.
Great prank. Nobody could argue with that.
No.
People are always pissed off at a prank, but you're right. Those are show up, be louder.
Yeah.
Keep it.
The kind of things that we did, and this was probably most prevalent in my assignment in Korea, because there was lots of shenanigans that happened there. It was just,
Yeah.
you're generally on a remote assignment. It's hard work.
Ah, there it is.
There was a.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, I think I've seen that picture.
That's a prank.
That's a good.
I'm not responsible for that, but I can say some people from my class were.
You knew some people that knew some people.
Yeah, I knew some people that knew some people. That's a good lighthearted prank there.
That is a good one. We would move cars a lot. And I mean, like, take the squadron commander's car and pick it up. You get like 6 or 8 burly dudes and just and put it like in an office, or and you get it through two, or just move it, like lift it up and put it. I don't think we ever got one on a roof, but we did that a few times.
Yeah.
A lot of bonfire activity that ended up being prankish. We did some, you'd go. I'm trying to think. This isn't really a prank. When we would go to Nellis, to the bar, we would have goofy name tags, right?
Yeah.
Or everybody would have a Moose Reed name tag. I'm the squadron commander, I gave all my squadron Moose Reed name tags, because that way, if they got in trouble for doing something stupid, they would go. The cops or whoever would call them and say, "Who are you?" Moose Reed, and everybody was Moose Reed. So then they would come to me, and then I would handle it. When I was in OV-10 FAC, we had some kind of.
I remember that prank, replacing someone's name tag.
But
Because you never look at the name tag on your uniform, right? It comes out of the closet.
Right. We had name tags that were they're NSFW, but they look like regular names,
Exactly.
But then you'd say it out loud and you go, oh, we did a lot of just goofy stuff when I was a lieutenant, a JO, a junior officer in the OV-10 squadron. We would set up a bowling alley in the officers' club with beer bottles and toilet paper rolls, and we would be bowling in the club, and things invariably would get a little broken.
What else we got in there?
Yeah. I digress.
Next question comes from Captain Jim, and Captain Jim wants to know, how many years were you at Edwards Air Force Base? And were you ever one of the guys during that time who buzzed us at Mammoth Mountain?
I was never actually stationed at Edwards.
That's my bad, because I wrote that probably on the announcement.
Did you?
Yeah.
I was at
Test pilot Edwards.
Yeah, I was at Nellis Air Force Base for 2 years. I don't know that I ever buzzed Mammoth Mountain, but I'll tell you, I flew over China Lake, I flew over the Sierras, I flew over the Edwards Ranges a few times. So I probably got close to Mammoth Mountain a couple times. We did some really good low levels out of Nellis. And I probably flew out of Nellis for 3 years, because I deployed there so often when I was in various stages of my career.
Right.
But
what else we got, Andy? Let's get through these questions. How many questions we got?
Legally buzzing. Two more?
2 more questions. Wow,
Two more questions.
Next question comes from Larry Stern, and he wants to know, what are you doing? What year did you retire? Excuse me, and what are you doing now, Colonel?
I retired in the end of 2009, and for the last 10 years, I've been employed by a major defense and aerospace technology company. In that organization, I've worked on the F-35 program off and on for probably 3 or 4 years. I'm actually working on it right now.
And again, thank you for the display.
I've done right now what my job is to provide maybe what you call it sustainment support or aftermarket support, ensuring that the airplanes that we build continue to fly. But I've been in advanced technology development, which was really interesting, where we were working on advanced technologies and in future airplanes, if you will. And I've done a lot of strategic planning and basically strategy for what our company was going to go do next. So some kind of cool stuff. Yeah, I've been doing that for about 10 years.
Next question.
2 more questions from the chat. The first one actually is for Rich very quickly. 2 more questions from the chat. One is for Rich very quickly. Can you tell us about the ejection seat behind you? Where did it come from? Is it ours?
Oh, yeah.
And what's the story?
Yeah, so this now is donated to the Adventurers Club because it needs to get out of my garage. But this ejection seat came out of the Southern California desert, namely the Smoke Tree Valley, which is uprange of the Chocolate Mountain Aerial Gunnery Range. And the story behind this is basically when I was a kid, my dad and I were tooling around the desert trying to find this piece of property that our family owned, and we found an ejection seat. and then we left it out.
What do we do with this?
Yeah, we drug it out. We left it out at my aunt's place in the desert and gave it to her for a couple years, and then I pulled it back to bring it here to show some people, and cleaned it up. And we looked up the story, and basically what happened is 2 A-7 pilots, an instructor and a student, came and they bounced off each other, I guess, in a rendezvous, and they basically ejected right away. So there's another seat somewhere in the California desert waiting to be discovered, probably in a similar location.
That person who sent that question ought to go find it.
Yeah. So there's another seat out there. It's from an A7, you know, and yeah, fairly interesting story.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool story.
But
That's
now
I think
it's
that's a Martin Baker seat, I think.
Yeah, I forget. I think it's an escape pack. I had all the research was much more in my head
When you
about a
first-
year ago
yeah.
when I did all this stuff.
Yeah.
But tonight it's just a prop because we're in aviation test flight month, so it's
good
now our
prop.
centerpiece for
excellent
the rest of the month. All right, last question, right, Andy?
Yes. The
Last
last question is to the Colonel again. You've probably seen both the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds fly their shows. What are some things that the Blue Angels do better, and what do the Thunderbirds do better?
Wow. Yeah, I'm not a great critique of air shows. What are some things? The Blue Angels to me always look like they fly closer. And the Thunderbirds look like they fly close too. But and I got a chance to fly with the Thunderbirds.
Yeah.
And I tell you, that's close.
That's close.
Well, that's close. The Blue Angels look like they fly closer. I'll go with that. The Thunderbirds, I don't think the Blue Angels, maybe it's been a while since I've seen a show, but they always surprise me with the sort of the what do they call it? It's sort of the surprise pass, you know? They'll have 4 of them doing some loop
And then
or
one's
something,
off here
and
that's
then
gonna come
2 of
behind.
them just blow right over the top of the crowd, you know, at about
Yeah.
100 feet. And it always goes, I always go, whoa. And they do it in full afterburner, and they go away from, you know, the direction the crowd is looking. So, you know, when you see 2 F-16s come overhead at about 100 feet with the afterburner blowing, and all that noise, man, it fires me up.
I'll tell you what, you know, the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds are great, but the most eye-watering, like, American moment I've had at an air show,
Yeah.
where it just really put everything into perspective.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we're talking about shock and awe and all this stuff and
Right.
everything like that. When that B-2 comes at you,
Oh, yeah.
and you're just sitting there and you just see this black,
Yeah.
silent, and you're like, man, like, if I was in a foxhole and I saw that, I'd be like, nah, I'm done. Like, we're all done. You know,
That-
what does that thing have? Oh, it can have nukes too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like, let's get the hell out of
Yeah, I'll finish with 2 things. On the Thunderbirds, the thing that amazes me about both the Thunderbirds, and I'm sure it's like this in the Blue Angels, I got to fly in the slot position, not in the front seat, in the back seat. When I was at Nellis, you know, I knew some of the Thunderbirds, so on a training sortie, and it was like, wow. But there's the movement that's in that formation that you see when you're in the formation that you never see from the ground is mind-boggling.
And it's just them
Yeah,
making minor
but there's all
corrections.
these little, you know, burbles. There's turbulence, and they're just constantly correcting. So the airplanes are actually moving a fair amount. I mean,
Do they have a different software loadout for that F-16?
nope, same.
It's just like the stock, so to speak. Like they don't get more of a
Nope.
vote than the computer than a normal.
It's a stock F-16. I mean, they take out the gun and they put in an oil tank to make the smoke, and there's a couple little things they do like that, but it's basically a stock F-16. The B-2. Let me finish on this. I thought I was bad when I went to war and I had a 4-ship of F-16. So I'm sitting there over, you know, Nazarita, talking to a controlling agency. This is when we're in the beginnings of OIF. And I've got myself and Korn, maybe it was a 4-ship. And controlling agency, and a B-2 checks in. And yeah, I forget, Red Crown or something was, you know, the controlling agency. You know, give me your loadout, you know, Demon 2-4 or whatever my call sign was today. And I go, Roger, I got 2 harms, I got 1 JDAM, and I got 1 WICMID. Roger, Spirit 2-2, what is your loadout? I got 36, you know, JDAMs. And then he goes, Roger, okay, Spirit 2-2, yeah, Demon, just hold there for a bit. We're going to give some targets to Spirit. So they rattle off 36 targets to this B-2. And finally, I think we just go home, you know. I'm like, I can't hold a candle to that. And every one of those JDAMs, you know, independently targeted, there's a guy up front going tap, 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 tap.
Yep.
Pew, tap, 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 pew, tap, 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 pew. There they go. So
That's
anyway.
crazy. Well, hey, Colonel Reed.
What an
thanks.
honor. It's
Yeah,
great
thank
to
you
be
for
here.
coming by. I'm glad you could make it.
My
And
pleasure.
you're going to have to come by once we reopen the club after all this coronavirus COVID stuff goes away.
I'm excited.
We normally have a ton of people in here, and I'm sure they'd all love to meet you. You
Yeah.
know, tonight was great. We really appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
So, for all our viewers out there, stay tuned. Like and subscribe our channel. Next week, more aviation test flight stuff. It's going to be great.
I'll be watching.
The whole month of July. Yep. So we will see you next week.
Take care. Thanks, Rich.
No problem.